Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened a bloodline that made Kunoichi irresistibly drawn to him? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Echo of a Vow. The air on the great Naruto bridge was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the bone-deep chill of Haku's ice. Mist clung to the unfinished railings, swallowing sound and sight, turning the world into a muted gray watercolor of conflict. Kakashi, his Sharingan a crimson vortex of fury, was locked in a deadly dance with Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist. Their clones flickered and died around them, the clash of steel ringing out like a death knell. Sakura stood guard over Tazuna, the bridge builder, her knuckles white where she gripped her kunai. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. Before her, inside a dome of crystalline mirrors, Sasuke lay still. Needles, slender and cruel as a spider's legs, protruded from his neck and chest. He had thrown himself in front of Naruto. He had fallen with a soft, final sigh. He was gone. And Naruto was pure, incandescent rage. "I'm going to kill you," he snarled, the words a guttural promise torn from his throat. His vision was tinged with red. The world narrowed to the serene, masked face reflected in 1,000 mirrors. The familiar, hateful chakra of the nine tails boiled beneath his skin, a furnace of power begging for release. He could feel its whispers, its promises of vengeance, its insatiable hunger. He lunged, a blur of orange and untamed fury. A Rasengan, ragged and incomplete, tore through the air, but Haku was already gone. Melting into another mirror, Naruto's fist smashed into the ice, cracking it but failing to shatter it. He was a wild animal, powerful but clumsy, throwing his entire being against an enemy who was like the wind, untouchable, everywhere at once. "Your movements are artless," Haku's voice echoed from all directions, calm and detached. "Rage is a hammer. It can shatter stone, but it cannot catch a hummingbird." Senbon needles rained down, a silver torrent. Naruto dodged and weaved, the Kyuubi's power granting him speed he didn't know he possessed, but it wasn't enough. For every dozen he evaded, one found its mark, sinking into his arms and legs. They didn't hurt so much as they stole his momentum, each a tiny anchor pulling him back from the precipice of his wrath. "He is a beast," Zabuza grunted, parrying a lightning-fast strike from Kakashi. "The fox is waking up." Kakashi's visible eye widened. He'd seen the faint traces of that malevolent chakra before, but this was different. It was a raw, unfiltered torrent. "Naruto, calm down. Don't let it take control." But Naruto couldn't hear him. All he could hear was the frantic, terrified beating of his own heart and the memory of Sasuke's last, faint smile. He had failed. He had let his teammate die. The shame of it was a poison, and the rage was the only antidote. He gathered his chakra, ignoring the needles peppering his skin. He formed a hand seal, sloppy and desperate. Shadow clone jutsu. Dozens of Narutos exploded into existence, each one a carbon copy of his fury. They threw themselves at the mirrors. A wave of orange against a wall of ice. It was a futile gesture. Haku moved between the reflections with impossible speed, a phantom of silver and black. With each pass, clones dissolved into smoke and needles found their way to the original, until Naruto was on one knee, panting, his body a pincushion of glittering senbon. "It is over," Haku's voice said, this time from directly in front of him. The masked shinobi stood just outside the dome, hands held in a one-handed seal. "You cannot win. Your friend died to protect you. Do not waste his sacrifice." That was the final blow. The words pierced deeper than any needle. Waste his sacrifice. Naruto's head snapped up, his blue eyes bleeding into crimson slits. A guttural roar ripped from his chest, a sound that was not entirely human. The red chakra exploded from him, visible now, a shroud of demonic energy that steamed in the cold air. But then, something else happened. Beneath the seething red of the fox, a new power stirred. It was not born of hatred or loss. It was ancient, dormant, a seed planted in his bloodline that had waited for the perfect storm of desperation and willpower to germinate. As Haku prepared a final, fatal volley of senbon, it awakened. It began not with a roar, but with a profound, deafening silence. The clash of kunai between Kakashi and Zabuza ceased. The groans of Gato's thugs at T. The far end of the bridge died in their throats. Even the mist seemed to still, its tendrils frozen in midair. The world held its breath. Then came the wave. It was not chakra in the way any of them understood it. It was a pressure. An invisible force that washed over the bridge from Naruto's position, carrying with it a weight that felt as heavy as a mountain and as warm as the midday sun. It was an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. Haku, who was closest, felt it first. The killing intent that had been honed over years of brutal training evaporated like mist in the dawn. The Senbon in their hand felt impossibly heavy. Their mind, once a crystalline lattice of tactical thought, became a wash of pure, instinctual awe. They looked at the boy kneeling before them, bleeding, enraged, grieving, and saw something else entirely. They saw a king. They saw a center of the universe. The thought of harming him became a physical impossibility, a violation against the natural order of things. Their knees weakened, and a gasp of utter bewilderment escaped their lips. On the other side of the bridge, Sakura's grief-stricken trance was shattered. The crushing sorrow for Sasuke didn't vanish, but it was violently shoved aside by a new, far more primal imperative. 1 second, she was a mourning child, the next, she was a lioness. An overwhelming, biological urge flooded every cell of her body with a single, non-negotiable command: protect him. Her mind was still reeling, trying to process what was happening, but her body was already moving. She shot to her feet, her kunai held in a reverse grip, and spun around, placing herself between Naruto and the rest of the world. Her green eyes, wide with a feral, protective light, scanned the mist for threats. The thought of Sasuke's still form was a painful memory. The thought of a single scratch marring Naruto was an unbearable future. The effect on the hired thugs was even more pronounced. These were men who lived by greed and fear, their wills as thin as rice paper. When the wave of sovereign energy washed over them, their minds simply shut down. They weren't afraid, fear was too complex an emotion for what they were experiencing. They were simply nullified. Dozens of hardened mercenaries fell to their knees, their eyes wide and vacant, their weapons clattering onto the stone. They were in the presence of something their souls recognized as an ultimate authority, and their bodies could do nothing but submit. Zabuza felt it as a cold dread that had nothing to do with Kakashi's Sharingan. Every instinct, every fiber of his being that had been honed in the bloody arenas of Kurigakure, screamed at him. It was a primal, animalistic warning that told him the boy radiating this impossible pressure was not prey. He was the apex predator. And to challenge him was to invite annihilation. His grip on the executioner's blade tightened until his knuckles were white, his muscles locked in a state of violent paralysis. He was the demon of the mist, and yet, he felt like a child staring into the heart of a typhoon. Kakashi, his senses heightened by the Sharingan, perceived it most clearly. It was not the Kyuubi's chakra. That was a chaotic, malevolent force. This was different. It was structured, harmonic, a perfectly ordered torrent of power that imposed its will on reality itself. His mind raced, sifting through years of training and countless scrolls. He recalled a dusty, forbidden text he had once glimpsed in the Third Hokage's private archives, a text that spoke of the Uzumaki clan not just as masters of sealing jutsu, but as the descendants of a primordial line, wielders of a Kekkei Genkai so rare it was considered a myth. It spoke of a sovereign's charm, an aura of leadership so potent that it could quell armies without a single blow. He had dismissed it as a fairy tale. Now, faced with its undeniable reality, a shiver of profound apprehension ran down his spine. This changed everything. Tazuna, the only one on the bridge with no chakra descents, only knew that the world had gone terrifyingly quiet and that every single ninja, friend and foe alike, had frozen in place, their attention fixated on the bleeding boy in orange. Naruto himself was only peripherally aware of the phenomenon. The searing rage of the fox was still there, but it was no longer in control. It had been subjugated, forked into the role of a power source for this new, greater energy. He felt a strange clarity, a sense of absolute certainty he had never known. The world, which had always felt chaotic and hostile, suddenly seemed simple. Its strings visible to him. The wave of sovereign energy receded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a ringing silence and a collection of utterly bewildered shinobi. The air still felt charged, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. Haku was still staring, their composure shattered. Zabuza was panting, sweat beading on his brow. Sakura was standing guard, her entire posture radiating a fierce loyalty that was entirely new. Naruto pushed himself to his feet. He felt no pain from the needles. He looked at his hands, then at the dome of mirrors. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. He drew in a breath, channeling chakra to his fist. It was not the wild, uncontrolled surge of before. This was a precise, measured flow. With a single step, he closed the distance to the nearest mirror. His punch was not explosive. It was a sharp, definitive strike, like a perfectly timed note in a song. The mirror, which had withstood the full force of his earlier rampage, shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. He moved to the next, and the next, shattering each with the same effortless precision. He was no longer a brawler. He was an executioner. Inside the dome, Haku could only watch, paralyzed by the residual awe. The boy moved with a grace and purpose that defied everything they knew. They made no move to stop him. When the last mirror fell, Naruto stood before them in the center of a field of broken ice, his expression unreadable. "It's over," Naruto said. His voice was quiet, devoid of its usual boisterous energy. It was calm, measured, and held the unshakable finality of a judge passing sentence. Haku looked at Naruto, then at the still form of Zabuza battling Kakashi. Their entire world, their entire purpose, had been built around being a tool for Zabuza. But in the face of this boy, that purpose felt small, insignificant. To stand against him felt like trying to stop the tide. It was not just futile, it was wrong. A strange sense of peace settled over them. They saw their path forward with absolute clarity. "You were right," Haku whispered, and then they were gone, a flicker of motion toward the main battle. Kakashi had Zabuza trapped, his lightning blade crackling to life, ready to deliver the final blow. But in that instant, Haku appeared between them, their arms outstretched. The Chidori pierced through their chest with a sickening sound. Naruto watched, his newfound clarity giving him an unnerving understanding of the scene. It was not just an act of loyalty. It was an act of offering. Haku had sacrificed themselves not just for Zabuza, but as a tribute to the power they had just witnessed. Zabuza stared in shock as Haku's blood splattered across his face. And then, as if on cue, the mist began to part, revealing the smirking, diminutive form of Gato, flanked by 100 armed thugs. Well, Zabuza," Gato sneered, clapping mockingly. "Looks like your little demon got exorcised. You're more trouble than you're worth. The new plan is simple. I'll kill you, the bridge builder, and these leaf ninja, and take the bridge for myself." The thugs laughed, a ragged, ugly sound that broke the spell hanging over the bridge. Zabuza looked at Haku's lifeless body, then at Gato's sneering face. Something in him, long dead and buried, began to stir. "You were right, kid," Zabuza said. His voice a low growl, but he was looking at Naruto. "Shinobi are still human." He looked at Haku's face, serene even in death. "Your words, they cut me deeper than any sword." He turned to Gato, a kunai held between his teeth. "You and I have a final destination to discuss. And you're paying for the transport, with your blood." The final battle was short and brutal. Zabuza, grievously wounded but fueled by a righteous fury, became the demon of his moniker one last time, carving a bloody path through Gato's men. As the last of the thugs fell and a dying Zabuza collapsed beside Haku, the sun finally broke through the clouds. A gentle snow began to fall, an impossible, beautiful sight in the middle of summer. Sasuke coughed, his eyes fluttering open. "Naruto." Sakura gasped, spinning around. "Sasuke-kun, you're alive." She rushed to his side, her relief palpable, but as she knelt beside him, her eyes kept darting back to Naruto, a confused, protective instinct still warring with her joy. Sasuke noticed her divided attention, a flicker of puzzlement in his dark eyes. Naruto felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him as the strange, sovereign power finally receded, leaving the familiar warmth of the Kyuubi's healing to knit his wounds. He looked at the scene before him, at Zabuza and Haku lying together in the snow, at a recovering Sasuke, at a relieved but wary Sakura. The world was loud and chaotic again. But something inside him had shifted, settled into a new place. He was different. Kakashi walked over, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. He said nothing, but his single uncovered eye was filled with a complex mixture of pride, concern, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. He stared at his student, no longer seeing just the knuckle-headed outcast, but a boy who held a power capable of shaking the very foundations of their world. He had a duty to report this. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the moment his report reached the Hokage, Naruto Uzumaki's life would never be the same again. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2, The Weight of a Gaze. The walk back to Konohagakure was a study in quiet transformation. The oppressive mist of the Land of Waves gave way to the familiar, earthy scent of the Land of Fire's forests. The silence that had fallen over Team 7 on the bridge had thawed, but it had not broken. It had reshaped itself into a new, unspoken dynamic that hummed with tension. Sakura, who had once orbited Sasuke like a devoted moon, now walked half a step behind Naruto. It was not a conscious decision. Her body simply arranged itself there, her senses unconsciously attuned to him. When a branch snapped in the woods, her head didn't turn toward the sound, her eyes flicked to Naruto, assessing his reaction first. It was a subtle, constant vigilance that irritated her as much as it confused her. Her heart still ached with a girlish flutter when she looked at Sasuke's handsome, brooding profile. But her instincts were tethered to the blonde boy beside her. Sasuke, for his part, was a storm of silent observation. He had woken up from a state of near death to find the world tilted on its axis. He remembered the blinding speed of Haku's needles, the selfless act of shielding his rival. He remembered darkness. Then he'd woken to Sakura's relieved cry, but her attention was fractured, her gaze continually drifting to a strangely serene Naruto. He saw how she walked now, a silent sentinel at Naruto's flank. He saw the way Kakashi's single eye rested on Naruto for long, contemplative stretches. Sasuke, who had always been the fulcrum of his team, the prodigy, the center of attention, now felt like he was on the outside of a secret he couldn't decipher. It was a novel and deeply unpleasant feeling. He didn't understand what had happened after he fell, but he knew it was the cause of this shift, and it gnawed his pride. Naruto himself was the calmest of them all. The echo of that strange, sovereign power resided within him, not as a raging fire, but as a deep, warm ember in his core. The world felt clearer. The constant, buzzing need for acknowledgement had quieted, replaced by a nascent self-assurance. He didn't swagger or boast. He simply walked, his presence a quiet statement of fact. He felt the weight of Sakura's attention and Sasuke's scrutiny, but it didn't unnerve him. It simply was. Their return was unceremonious. The Chunin guards at the main gate, grizzled veterans who had seen 1,000 shinobi come and go, barely glanced at the returning genin. But as Naruto passed, one of the guards, a man named Katetsu, unconsciously straightened his posture. It was a flicker of reflex, the kind of subtle deference one afforded a clan head or a high-ranking Junin. He didn't even realize he'd done it. His partner, Izumo, gave him a questioning look, which Katetsu brushed off with a shrug. The debriefing took place in the Hokage's office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and pipe smoke. Hiruzen Sarutobi sat behind his desk, his aged face a mask of grandfatherly calm that betrayed none of the sharp intelligence behind his eyes. Kakashi delivered his report with his usual detached efficiency. He detailed the deception of the mission's rank, Zabuza's skills, the confrontation on the bridge. When he reached the critical moment, he chose his words with surgical precision. Sasuke was rendered incapacitated by the enemy shinobi, Haku. In that moment, Naruto's chakra flared. It was not the Kyuubi's influence, Lord Third. Not entirely. Kakashi paused, ensuring he had the Hokage's complete attention. It was a pressure, an overwhelming wave of authority. It emanated from him and washed over the entire bridge. Zabuza's hired mercenaries were instantly pacified, falling to their knees without a fight. The enemy shinobi, Haku and Zabuza, were both momentarily paralyzed. Even my own movements were restricted. Hiruzen's fingers, which had been steepled under his chin, tightened slightly. He took a long, slow draw from his pipe, the smoke curling around his head like a veil. In Naruto's own state during this phenomenon, he appeared lucid, focused, Kakashi said. The rage he had been displaying vanished. He dispatched the enemy's primary jutsu with a level of precision I have not previously seen from him. After the event, the energy signature vanished completely. Sakura and Sasuke stood silently, listening. It was the first time they were hearing an official description of what had transpired. Sakura's eyes widened in recognition. Authority. That was the word. It was exactly what she had felt, an absolute, undeniable command that resonated in her very bones. Sasuke's jaw tightened. So that was it. The Dobi had unlocked S. own freakish power while he was unconscious. The revelation was like acid in his gut. Hiruzen turned his gaze to Naruto. Naruto. What do you remember? Naruto met the old man's eyes. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny. The analytical edge to their questions. The old Naruto would have puffed out his chest and claimed he'd mastered some awesome new super jutsu. The new Naruto felt a NT instinct, an instinct for preservation. To reveal too much was to make himself a target, a specimen to be dissected. I was angry, he said, his voice steady. Sasuke was hurt. It felt like the fox's chakra was taking over. But then, everything went quiet. I felt strong, calm. I just knew what I had to do to break those mirrors. That's all. It was the truth, but a carefully curated version of it. Hiruzen studied him for a long moment, his gaze sharp enough to peel back layers of deception. But he found no lie in Naruto's eyes, only a newfound and surprising composure. I see, the Hokage said finally. He stamped the mission report with a heavy, crimson seal. This mission is now classified as A rank. The details of Naruto's chakra event are to be sealed under my personal authority. Why? Oh, you are all forbidden from speaking of it to anyone. Is that understood? Yes, Lord Hokage, they chorused. As they were dismissed, Hiruzen's voice stopped Kakashi at the door. A moment, John and Hitaki. Alone. Once the door was closed, the grandfatherly facade dropped completely from the third Hokage's face. He looked older, wearier. What are you not telling me, Kakashi? The Uzumaki archives, Kakashi said quietly. The sealed section. I once saw a scroll mentioning a forgotten Kekkei Genkei. A sovereign's charm. It was described not as a jutsu, but as an aura. A force of will that could command respect and quell aggression. It was dismissed as a myth, a founding legend to bolster the clan's prestige. Hiruzen's eyes closed. It is no myth, he whispered, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets. It was the reason the Uzumaki were so feared, and why their village was annihilated by the combined forces of several nations. They feared a leader who could unite the world not through force, but through sheer presence. I had hoped that trait had been diluted to nothingness. It seems I was wrong. He opened his eyes, and they were hard as flint. Watch him, Kakashi. His life just became infinitely more complicated. And more dangerous. In the days that followed, Konoha buzzed with the impending Chunin exams. Genin from across the lands filled the streets, a vibrant, nervous energy crackling in the air. For Naruto, it was like walking through a world that was subtly, yet fundamentally, altered. He was training near one of the public grounds, trying to improve his tree climbing, when he heard familiar voices. Billboard brow. I can't believe you're still fawning over Sasuke-kun when he so obviously prefers a more refined Kunoichi. Ino Yamanaka's voice was as sharp as ever. Oh, please, Ino pig. The only thing refined about you is your ability to be annoying. Sakura shot back. Their argument came to an abrupt halt as Naruto, having finished his exercise, walked past them on his way to get a drink. He gave them a simple nod, not even breaking his stride. Sakura's retort died in her throat, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod back. Ino, however, froze mid-insult. She watched him walk away. Her mouth slightly agape. It wasn't a conscious thought, but a deep, resonant feeling. The boy she had always dismissed as a loudmouthed, orange-clad buffoon suddenly had presence. There was a confidence in his gait, a placid set to his shoulders that demanded a second look. It was infuriating. Why was she staring at Naruto? She shook her head, a faint blush on her cheeks. And turned back to Sakura, the fire in her argument feeling suddenly childish and muted. Miles away, in the pristine, sterile confines of the Hyuga compound, Hinata was engaged in a tle fist sparring session with her cousin, Neji. Her movements were fluid and precise, but her mind was elsewhere. Her gaze kept drifting over the compound walls, toward the heart of the village. Your focus is lacking, Lady Hinata. Neji stated, his voice flat as he easily parried one of her strikes. Your eyes are unfocused. What distracts you? Hinata flushed, murmuring an apology. Activating her Byakugan. She intended to refocus on Neji's chakra points, but her gaze was drawn, as if by a magnet, across the village. She found him instantly. Naruto. He was sitting atop a monument, eating a cup of instant ramen. But what her eyes saw was breathtaking. The chaotic, spiky blue chakra she had always associated with him was still there, but it was now a mere corona around a central, incandescent sphere. At his very core, where his chakra network converged, there was a point of light that looked like a miniature sun. It was a perfectly stable, serene globe of golden energy that radiated a gentle, palpable warmth. Even from this distance, it was the most beautiful and powerful thing she had ever seen. The sight stole her breath, and she stumbled, deactivating her Byakugan as her head swam. Her father, Hiyashi Hyuga, who was observing the training from a nearby veranda, saw her falter. He followed her line of sight, his own Byakugan flaring to life. He saw the Uzumaki boy. And he saw the anomaly. He could not perceive it with the same emotional resonance as Hinata, but his trained eyes saw something that should not be possible, a perfectly ordered, self-contained sphere of pure, golden chakra at the heart of the Jinchuriki's turbulent reserves. It was not demonic. It was not natural. It was sovereign. And it was a threat. An unknown variable of immense power residing in the village's most volatile weapon was an unacceptable risk. The subtle ripples of Naruto's awakening continued to spread. Kurenai Yuhi was walking with her team when she passed Team 7 on one of Konoha's bridges. She offered Kakashi a professional nod, but her eyes were drawn to his blonde student. For a fleeting second, she felt an instinctual wave of deference, a professional respect that felt utterly out of place. It was the same feeling she got when standing before the Hokage, an acknowledgement of superior will. It was gone in an instant, leaving her with a faint sense of unease she couldn't quite place. The first political tremor struck a week before the exams. Hiyashi Hyuga requested a formal audience with the Hokage and the village council. He spoke with cold, clan head precision. "Lord Hokage," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "My Byakugan has observed a significant and uncatalogued chakra mutation within the Nine Tails Jinchuriki. It presents as a highly structured and potent energy source, distinct from the demon fox's own. As the boy's control is questionable at best, this represents a clear and present danger to the security of this village." Homura and Kaharu, the two village elders, exchanged worried glances. They were relics of a more cautious time, and the words, Jinchuriki, and mutation, in the same sentence were a catalyst for their deepest fears. "What do you propose, Hiyashi?" Kaharu asked, her voice thin and dry. Before Hiyashi could answer, another voice cut through the chamber, smooth and dangerous as oiled silk. "I support Lord Hyuga's assessment." Danzo Shimura stepped from the shadows, his cane tapping softly on the stone floor. "My sources have also confirmed an anomalous event during the team's recent mission in the Land of Waves. An uncontrolled power of this magnitude cannot be left unexamined. It must be understood. For the good of Konoha, we must know the exact nature of this ability. And its limits." Hiruzen felt the trap closing. Hiyashi's concern was genuine, if colored by his clan's inherent arrogance. Danzo's motives were far more sinister. He didn't want to understand the power, he wanted to possess it, to weaponize it. But together, their influence was too great to ignore. He was being outmaneuvered. "An evaluation, then," Hiruzen said, his voice heavy. "A comprehensive assessment of his abilities. It will be conducted by Anbu, under my direct supervision." It was the only compromise he could force, the only way to keep Danzo's root operatives away from the boy. The summons found Naruto at his favorite place in the world, Ichiraku Ramen. He was halfway through a bowl of miso pork, laughing at a joke from Tyuki, when the world seemed to lose its color. A figure appeared beside him in a swirl of leaves and a whisper of displaced air. The Anbu, clad in gray armor and a porcelain animal mask, radiated an aura of cold, lethal purpose. Naruto Uzumaki, the Anbu's voice was distorted by the mask, flat and devoid of inflection. "You have been summoned. By order of the Hokage and the Council of Konoha, you are to report to Training Ground 44 for a comprehensive ability evaluation. Effective immediately." Tyuki and Ayame froze, the cheerful atmosphere of the ramen stand instantly evaporating. This was not a normal summons. This was the kind of order that preceded a court-martial or an interrogation. Naruto placed his chopsticks down neatly. He felt the familiar, cold dread of being singled out, of being treated like a problem to be solved. But something was different now. The ember of sovereignty within him met that dread not with fear, but with a quiet, unyielding resolve. He was not just a container. He was not just an outcast. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He turned slowly, his blue eyes meeting the empty holes of the ANBU's mask. There was no defiance in his gaze, no fear, only a calm, unwavering acceptance. He had felt that power on the bridge. He didn't understand it, but he knew it was a part of him now. And he would not let them treat him like a caged animal. Without a word, he stood up, leaving enough money on the counter to pay for his meal. He gave the Anbu a single, decisive nod. The message was clear: I will comply. But I will not be cowed. As he walked away, flanked by the silent operative, he knew he was heading into the lion's den. The politics of the village, a world he had always been blissfully ignorant of, were now turning their gaze upon him. And he knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that he would have to be strong enough to meet that gaze without flinching. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3, The Forest of Kings. Training Ground 44 was not a forest, it was a cage. A sprawling, 50-mile-wide prison of ancient trees, monstrous fauna, and suffocating silence. It was known as the Forest of Death for a reason, and it was here that they had brought him. Naruto stood in a small, unnaturally clear patch of ground, the kind of clearing that is usually the sign of a predator's territory. He was the prey. Surrounding him, perched silently in the canopy of the giant trees, were 5 figures clad in the gray and white of the Anbu. Their porcelain masks, a crow, a cat, a monkey, a wolf, and a weasel, were impassive and chilling. A voice, distorted and cold, echoed from the crow-masked operative. The evaluation will now commence, Naruto Uzumaki. The objective is survival. You are to evade and incapacitate this squad. We are authorized to use any and all means short of lethal force. Naruto's knuckles were white where he clenched his fists. This was no test. It was a hunt. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes on him, knowing the Hokage and the council were likely observing this through some jutsu. They wanted to see the power from the bridge. They wanted to poke the beast and see if it would roar. Begin, the voice commanded. The world exploded into motion. The cat and the monkey descended in a blur, their movements too fast for an ordinary genin to track. One came high with a devastating axe kick, the other low with a sweep aimed at his legs. It was a classic pincer movement designed to break a target in a single, overwhelming assault. Naruto didn't try to meet them head-on. He slammed his palms onto the ground. Earth-style, headhunter jutsu. The ground beneath the 2 Anbu dissolved into loose soil. They sank up to their chests, their coordinated attack ruined. It was a basic jutsu, but his timing was perfect. He didn't wait for their surprise to fade. He was already moving, weaving through the trees, becoming a flicker of orange in the gloom. The wolf-masked Anbu landed silently behind him, a trench knife gleaming in its hand. Your instincts are sharp, Jinchuriki. But you cannot run. The word Jinchuriki was a loaded dart, meant to provoke. Naruto spun, a kunai in his hand, and met the attack with a shower of sparks. He was outmatched in skill and experience, but the Kyuubi's stamina flowed through him, a boundless well of energy. He parried, dodged, and fell back, a fighting retreat. From the trees, the weasel-masked Anbu, a woman by her slender build, flashed through a series of hand seals. Water-style, starch syrup capturing field. A torrent of sticky, viscous liquid shot from her mouth, blanketing the area. Naruto leapt back, avoiding the main blast, but the spray caught his leg, gluing him to the trunk of a tree. The wolf was on him in an instant, the trench knife pressed against his throat. Is this all? The wolf sneered, his voice a low growl. The great power that pacified 100 mercenaries. Or were you just a fluke? He was goading him, pushing him. Naruto could feel the intent behind the words, the desire to see him break, to see the monster they all believed was lurking just beneath his skin. He felt the familiar surge of red chakra, hot and angry. The fox was responding to the taunt, eager to be unleashed. But beneath it, the other power, the golden ember of sovereignty, pulsed with a calm, steady rhythm. It didn't offer rage. It offered clarity. They want you to be a beast, it seemed to whisper. Show them a king instead. Shadow clone jutsu, Naruto said, his voice even. Dozens of clones popped into existence, not to attack, but to swarm his own captured body. They tore and clawed at the syrup, a frantic effort that bought him precious seconds. The crow, clearly the squad leader, observed from a high branch. He refuses to use the Kyuubi's power, even when cornered. Increase the pressure. To the weasel, he commanded, psychological assault. Use the intel from Lord Danzo. The weasel's masked face turned toward Naruto. Her voice, though filtered, was sharp and feminine. You fight to be acknowledged by a village that despises you. A village that celebrated the death of the fourth Hokage. But mourned the fact that you survived. Minato Namikaze would be ashamed to see his legacy reduced to this, a pathetic creature begging for scraps of affection. The name hit Naruto like a physical blow. Minato Namikaze. The fourth Hokage. Why would she? His mind reeled. The whispers in the village, the looks of hatred, the carefully omitted lessons in the academy, it all coalesced into a single, devastating realization. The weasel wasn't just taunting him, she was telling him the truth. The red chakra exploded from him. A single, furious tail whipped out, shattering the tree he was stuck to and sending the wolf operative flying. The air grew heavy, oppressive with raw, demonic power. In the Hokage's distant office, the crystal ball flared crimson. Danzo leaned forward, a grim smile playing on his lips. But the sovereign power flared with it. It didn't suppress the Kyuubi's rage this time. It wrapped around it, contained it, and gave it shape. The oppressive, hateful aura was still there. But at its heart was a core of pure, unshakable will. The golden light Hinata had seen was now visible to the Anbu, a sun shining through a shroud of red storm clouds. The effect was immediate and bizarre. The wolf, recovering from his fall, felt his killing intent drain away. He looked at the enraged boy and felt not fear, but a profound, instinctual reluctance to engage. His duty screamed at him to attack, but his gut screamed louder to kneel. The weasel, who had delivered the verbal blow, felt it most acutely. The sight of Naruto's controlled fury sent a shiver through her that was not fear. It was awe. A primal part of her brain, the part that recognized power, was captivated. Her hands, poised for the next set of seals, felt heavy and useless. To attack him felt like sacrilege. Naruto's head snapped up. His eyes were crimson slits, but his voice was his own, cold and clear. You will not speak his name again. He vanished, not with the wild lunge of a beast, but with the calculated speed of a master. He appeared before the weasel, his hand outstretched, not to strike, but to gently touch the center of her porcelain mask. A wave of pure, concentrated will flowed from his palm. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement. I am here, and you are beneath me. The weasel gasped, stumbling back as if she'd received an electric shock. Her mask cracked down the middle. The crow leader, seeing his squad's resolve crumbling, knew the evaluation was over. Stand down, he commanded, his voice tight. The objective has been met. The red chakra receded, the golden light sinking back beneath Naruto's skin. He stood there, panting, the revelation of his heritage a fresh, gaping wound in his soul. He had not won by overpowering them. He had won by forcing them to stand down. He had shown them the power they wanted to see, but he had shown them it was on his terms. In his office, Hiruzen let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Danzo was silent. His visible eye narrowed in cold, calculating thought. The boy was not a weapon to be pointed. He was a force to be reckoned with. The first phase of the Chunin exams was a written test designed to test information gathering. A test Naruto passed only through Hinata's desperate, unspoken assistance and a final, bluff-filled speech about the value of guts. It was in the forest of death that the true exam began. As Team 7 stood before the massive, chained gates, the air was thick with the bravado and fear of dozens of genin teams. Enko Mitarashi, the proctor, gave her speech with a sadistic glee. Her words painting a bloody picture of the dangers within. As the gates creaked open, Naruto felt the familiar weight of his teammates' gazes. Sasuke's was a sharp, competitive glare. A silent promise to outperform him and reclaim his position as the team's ace. Sakura's was more complex, a mixture of worry, residual awe from the bridge, and a confusing, instinctual desire to stay close to him. Stay sharp, Naruto said. His voice quiet but firm. Don't get separated. It wasn't a plea or a suggestion. It was a soft-spoken command, and to her own surprise, Sakura nodded without a single sarcastic retort. Sasuke just scoffed and ran ahead, plunging into the gloom. The forest was a labyrinth of menace. The cries of unseen creatures echoed through the trees, and the air was heavy with humidity and the scent of decay. Almost immediately, Naruto's presence began to subtly warp the battlefield. A team from the village hidden by the waterfall, led by a Kunoichi with sharp sensory skills, was tracking Team 7. As they closed in, the Kunoichi suddenly held up a hand, stopping her teammates. "Hold on," she whispered. "Something's wrong." "What is it?" her teammate asked. "They're right there. The Uchiha is isolated." Quote, "I know." She shook her head, unable to explain the feeling. "It feels like we're walking toward a cliff. My instincts are screaming at me to go the other way." She couldn't explain that the orange-clad boy felt less like a target and more like the epicenter of a territory she had no right to enter. They changed course, seeking easier prey. Deeper in the forest, Team 7 found themselves cornered. Not by ninja, but by one of the forest's native monstrosities, a giant, multi-limbed serpent that crashed through the trees with the force of a battering ram. Asuke's fireballs sizzled against its thick, damp scales. Sakura's traps were brushed aside. They were outmatched. As the serpent coiled, ready to strike, a flurry of shuriken embedded themselves in its eye. "Looks like you guys could use a hand," Kiba Inuzuka shouted, appearing on the back of a snarling Akamaru. Team 8 and Team 10 emerged from the foliage, having been drawn to the commotion. "Troublesome," Shikamaru sighed, already analyzing the situation. "Its scales are too thick. A direct assault is pointless." The serpent hissed, its massive head swiveling to face the newcomers, its unhinged eye fixing on the largest group of threats. It lunged. Panic set in. Choji fumbled for his soldier pills. Ino's mind transfer jutsu would be useless against a creature of this size. "Ino, use your jutsu on me." Naruto's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and clear. "What? Naruto, are you crazy? It won't work on that thing." She yelled back. "Not on it. On me. Link me with Shikamaru and Hinata." He commanded, pointing. "Hinata. Byakugan. Find its softest point, under the jawline where the scales are thinnest. Shikamaru, I need a plan to get me there. Now." There was no time to argue. His tone wasn't questioning, it was absolute. Compelled by his sheer certainty, Ino flashed a hand seal. Mind-body transmission. Her consciousness slammed into Naruto's, and for a dizzying second, she was overwhelmed. His mind wasn't the simple, boisterous place she'd imagined. It was a fortress, and at its center was that warm, golden light, a sun of pure will. She felt a phantom echo of the awe she'd felt in the clearing. Shaking it off, she acted as a switchboard, connecting his thoughts to the others. There. Hinata's voice was a clear thought in his mind, her Byakugan pinpointing a spot no bigger than a dinner plate. The beast coils to the left before it strikes. Shikamaru's lazy drawl echoed in his head, a complex web of shadows and feints forming with brilliant speed. Kiba, you and Akamaru draw its attention to the right. Choji, human boulder on its tail the moment it commits. Sakura, I need you to use a wire trap to break its line of sight for half a second. That's the opening. It was a complex, risky plan that required perfect timing from three separate teams who had never worked together. But linked through Naruto's commanding will, there was no hesitation. "Let's go." Naruto roared, and they moved as one. The battle was a symphony of controlled chaos. Kiba's feint, Choji's disruption, Sakura's perfectly timed trap, it all flowed together. For one critical instant, the serpent was blind and off balance. It was all the opening Naruto needed. With 100 shadow clones acting as decoys and springboards, he launched himself into the air, a Rasengan roaring in his palm. He twisted, diving under the creature's jaw and slamming the spiraling sphere of chakra directly into the weak point Hinata had found. The serpent shrieked, a sound that shook the trees, and crashed to the ground, dead. Silence descended, broken only by the heavy panting of the exhausted genin. They stared at the dead monster, then at each other, and finally, at Naruto. He had taken three disparate, rival teams and forged them into a single, cohesive unit in under a minute. Shikamaru collapsed against a tree, muttering, "Way too troublesome." But there was a look of grudging respect in his eyes. Kiba was speechless, staring at Naruto as if seeing him for the first time. Ino, withdrawing her jutsu, felt a dizzying sense of connection to him, a feeling that was both exhilarating and terrifying. And that's when the wind changed. The air grew cold, heavy, and smelled of ozone and old blood. A voice, like the hiss of 1,000 snakes, slithered from the shadows. My, what a delightful display. To inspire such loyalty in the face of impossible odds, you are a fascinating child. Orochimaru emerged from the trees, his skin unnaturally pale, his golden eyes slitted like a cat's. A wave of pure, unadulterated killing intent washed over them, so potent it felt like a physical force. It was the malice of a predator that had lived for decades, a promise of a slow, painful, and meaningless death. The genin froze. Their bodies refused to obey. Shikamaru's brilliant mind went blank. Kiba's feral instinct screamed at him to play dead. Sakura trembled, a choked sob caught in her throat. This was not a shinobi. This was a force of nature. A god of death. But the fear did not paralyze Naruto. As the wave of malice washed over him, the sovereign ember in his soul roared to life, a defensive conflagration of pure will. It didn't destroy the fear, but it met it, pushed back against it, creating a pocket of calm in the hurricane of terror. He was still afraid, but he was not broken. He was the king in his own castle. And this intruder was not welcome. The effect rippled outward. Sakura, Ino, and Hinata, who were closest to him, felt the suffocating pressure lessen. Orochimaru's killing intent was still there. A terrifying storm on the horizon, but Naruto's aura was a shield, a bulwark of defiance. The primal urge that had been born on the bridge in the land of waves surged through them. The command to protect him. With trembling hands, they drew their kunai. They didn't know what they could possibly do against a monster like this, but they knew they could not let him face it alone. They formed a ragged, terrified, but unbroken circle around Naruto, their small blades pointed outward at the Sannin. Orochimaru's smile widened. His eyes, which had been fixed on Sasuke, the prize, now shifted to Naruto. He saw the Uchiha, paralyzed by fear and rage at his own weakness. But he saw the dead last, the Jinchuriki, standing his ground, surrounded by a royal guard of terrified but resolute Kunoichi. This was new. This was a power he had never encountered. It was not jutsu. It was not bloodline in any traditional sense. It was the power to command hearts, to inspire loyalty even in the face of absolute despair. Incredible, Orochimaru hissed, his tongue flicking out to taste the air. He decided to test his theory. He vanished, appearing directly in front of Sasuke, his hand wreathed in purple chakra. But before he could strike, a new figure intercepted him. A blur of motion, a flash of steel, and Anko Mitarashi stood between Orochimaru and the genin, her twin kunai held in a defensive stance. She, too, felt the bizarre clash of energies. The cold, familiar terror of her former master's chakra was a poison in the air. But cutting through it was a warm, almonding presence from the blonde kid in orange. She saw the scene, the frozen Uchiha, the defiant Uzumaki, the protective circle of girls, and understood none of it. Orochimaru, she snarled. Fancy meeting you here. I'd say it's a pleasure, but I'd be lying. Orochimaru chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Anko. Still playing guard dog for the old monkey, I see. His gaze lingered on Naruto for one last, long moment. A look of hungry fascination. No matter. I have what I came for. His neck elongated unnaturally, striking like a snake. He bit down hard on Sasuke's shoulder, and the boy screamed. A cry of pure agony as the curse mark was branded into his flesh. With a final, chilling laugh, Orochimaru melted back into the shadows, leaving behind a comatose Sasuke and a group of genin on the verge of mental collapse. Anko rushed to Sasuke's side, her face grim. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the image from her mind. In the face of a monster that had made even her, a seasoned Tokubetsu Jonin, feel a flicker of her old childhood terror, that boy had not broken. He had not only stood his ground, but he had become a shield for others. A shiver that had nothing to do with her former master ran down her spine. The Chunin exams had just become infinitely more interesting. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4, A Storm of Sand and Sovereignty. The oppressive silence in the wake of Orochimaru's departure was a living thing. Heavy and suffocating. For a long moment, no one moved. The genin were frozen, puppets with their strings cut, their minds still reeling from the sheer, crushing weight of the Sannin's malevolence. It was Naruto who broke the spell. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the golden ember of his own power a defiant hearth against the lingering chill of the killing intent. Fear was still a coppery taste in his mouth, but the paralysis was gone. He was the anchor in the storm. "Sakura," he said, his voice cutting through the ringing in their ears. It was quiet, but it held an undeniable firmness that commanded attention. "Check on Sasuke. Basic first aid. Stop the bleeding, but don't touch the mark on his shoulder." Sakura flinched, her wide, terrified eyes snapping to his. She was trembling so badly she could barely stand, but his voice was a lifeline. It was a clear, simple instruction in a world that had just become terrifyingly complex. She scrambled to Sasuke's side. Her movements clumsy with shock but driven by the purpose he had given her. He turned to the other teams. Kiba was on the ground, with Akamaru whimpering and licking his face. Choji was pale, and Shikamaru was staring into space, his mind clearly struggling to reboot. "Ino, check on Shikamaru. Make sure he's still with us." He looked at Hinata, who was staring at him with wide, lavender eyes, seeing not the demon fox, but the warm, protective light that had shielded them. "Hinata, you're the calmest one here. Keep a lookout. He might come back." They all obeyed without question. It was instinctual. In the face of a true monster, they didn't look to the Jonin in training, Anko. They looked to the boy who had stood his ground. Anko watched the scene, a strange expression on her face. She was busy applying a field-grade sealing tag to Sasuke's curse mark, a temporary measure to suppress its venomous chakra. But her attention was on Naruto. The kid was acting like a seasoned squad leader, triaging the psychological trauma of his peers with an authority that was completely at odds with his rank and reputation. He wasn't barking orders, he was creating stability, a center of gravity for them all to cling to. She had felt his bizarre aura push back against Orochimaru's. It wasn't aggressive. It was foundational, like a mountain refusing to be moved by the wind. This kid was more than just a Jinchuriki. He was something else entirely. The journey to the central tower was a grim, silent affair. They carried an unconscious Sasuke, the weight of their near-death experience pressing down on them. When they finally stumbled through the doors, they were greeted by the sight of the other teams who had passed, their faces a mixture of relief and exhaustion. But the mood in the room shifted as Team 7 entered. The sight of a fallen Uchiha, the disheveled state of 3 full teams, and the grim look on Anko's face told a story of a far greater trial than any of them had faced. Iruka-sensei, who was there to greet the passing teams, rushed forward, his face etched with worry. "What happened out there?" "Complications," Anko said, her voice tight. "Get the Uchiha to the infirmary. Now." Before anyone could ask more questions, the third Hokage appeared in a swirl of leaves, flanked by several Jonin. His eyes swept over the assembled genin, lingering for a fraction of a second on Naruto. A silent acknowledgement passing between them. "Due to the unexpectedly high number of teams that have passed this phase, Hiruzen announced, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "We will now hold a preliminary round to reduce the number of competitors for the final exam." A giant electronic board on the wall lit up, names scrolling rapidly before locking into place. The first match was announced. Sasuke Uchiha vs. Yoroi Ikato. A medical nin shook his head grimly. "Lord Hokage, Sasuke Uchiha is in no condition to fight." "He will fight," a voice rasped. Kakashi appeared, leaning against the doorway. "The curse mark is temporarily sealed. If he wakes, the choice will be his." The names on the board spun again. Naruto Uzumaki vs. Kiba Inuzuka. Kiba's head snapped up. A wolfish grin spread across his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. His usual boisterous arrogance was tempered by a newfound respect. He remembered how Naruto had seamlessly directed their teams against the giant serpent. How he had stood firm against a terror that had reduced Kiba to a trembling mess. To fight him now felt different. It wasn't just a chance to show off, it was a chance to measure himself against a new standard. From the viewing balcony above, the Sand siblings watched. Kankuro smirked, but Temari's gaze was analytical. She had seen the way the Konoha genin had deferred to the blonde one. The way the girls, in particular, seemed to unconsciously orbit him. She was a keen observer of power dynamics, and what she was seeing didn't make sense. The Uchiha was supposed to be the prize. But the Uzumaki boy was the one who held the room's attention. "This should be amusing," she murmured, her eyes narrowed. The fight was fast and brutal. Kiba and Akamaru came. at Naruto with a perfectly synchronized fang over fang, a spinning vortex of claws and teeth. The old Naruto would have met it head-on with a messy barrage of shadow clones. The new Naruto sidestepped, his movements economical, and threw a single, well-aimed shuriken, not at Kiba, but at a smoke bomb he had discreetly dropped a moment before. The arena filled with thick, gray smoke. "You can't hide from my nose, Naruto." Kiba's voice echoed, confident. "I'm not hiding," Naruto's voice replied, seemingly from the other side of the arena. "I'm just changing the rules." Suddenly, two Akamarus shot out of the smoke, both charging Kiba. He froze for a split second, confused. In that instant, one of the Akamarus puffed into a shadow clone of Naruto, who delivered a sharp kick to the back of Kiba's knees, sending him sprawling. He had used a transformation jutsu on a clone, a simple but brilliant tactic that used Kiba's own heightened senses against him. The fight ended a moment later, with Naruto using a clever combination of clones to maneuver Kiba into a position where a single, decisive blow rendered him unconscious. It was a victory of strategy, not of brute force. As the proctor declared him the winner, Naruto stood over his defeated opponent, breathing steadily. A ripple of surprised murmurs went through the crowd. This was not the clumsy, talentless dead last they remembered. His was a fighter with cunning and composure. Sakura watched from the sidelines, her hands clenched. A swell of pride filled her chest, an emotion so unfamiliar in relation to Naruto that it left her feeling dizzy. Ino, standing a few feet away, had a similar, conflicted look on her face. Tenten raised an eyebrow, impressed by his use of tactics. Even Temari leaned forward slightly, a flicker of genuine interest in her teal eyes. As Naruto walked back to the waiting area, a figure blocked his path. Neji Hyuga stood before him, his pale, lavender eyes filled with a cold, dismissive disdain. "Do not mistake a single crude victory for strength," Neji said, his voice soft but laced with contempt. "A failure will always be a failure. It is destiny. You struggle against a current that has already determined your course. That monstrous chakra you possess is a cage, not a key. You are trapped by your fate, just as others are trapped by theirs." His gaze flicked pointedly toward Hinata, who flinched as if struck. "Leave her out of this," Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. The ambient warmth of his sovereign power began to coalesce, the air around him growing heavy. "Why?" Neji scoffed. "She is the perfect example. A main house member with the will of a branch house servant. She is a flaw in the fabric of the Hyuga, destined for mediocrity. Just as you are destined to be a reviled outcast. Naruto-kun, please, don't," Hinata whispered, stepping forward. Neji turned on her, his voice dripping with scorn. "Do not interfere, Lady Hinata. This does not concern a weakling like you." That was the spark. Naruto didn't shout. He didn't form a Rasengan. He simply focused. For a brief, intense moment, he unleashed a pinpoint burst of his sovereign aura directly at Neji. It wasn't an attack. It was a silent, crushing declaration of will. Neji felt it as a sudden, inexplicable pressure, as if the gravity in the room had quadrupled. His breath caught in his chest. His knees felt weak. His Byakugan flared instinctively. And for a split second, he saw it, the incandescent, golden sun at the core of Naruto's being. It was a power so ordered, so absolute, that it made the Hyugas' rigid doctrines of fate seem like a child's tantrum. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him shaken to his core. Naruto took a step forward, his blue eyes as hard as ice. "You talk about fate," he said. His voice low and intense. "But you're just afraid. You hide behind that word because you're too scared to believe you can change anything. I'm going to change it all. And when we fight in the finals, I'm going to prove it to you." He walked past, leaving a stunned and unnerved Neji Hyuga in his wake. Later, as the preliminary matches concluded, Naruto found himself leaning against a railing. Trying to process the swirling emotions inside him, the anger at Neji, the worry for Sasuke, the strange new power he was beginning to understand. Not bad, for a Konoha shrimp. He turned to find Temari. The Kunoichi from the sand, standing beside him, her giant fan slung across her back. Her expression was a mixture of arrogance and genuine curiosity. "You've got a strange effect on people," she said. Her voice a sultry drawl. "Especially the women in your village. They look at you like you're the second coming of the first Hokage. What's your secret?" Or is that just how pathetic Konoha Kunoichi are? It was a blatant probe, laced with an insult designed to put him on the defensive. The old Naruto would have risen to the bait, shouting and posturing. The new Naruto simply met her gaze, his expression unreadable. His aura remained passive, but its quiet confidence was a shield she couldn't seem to penetrate. Her usual tactics of intimidation and verbal sparring felt strangely ineffective. It was like trying to punch water. "Maybe we're just not as easy to read as you think," he replied, his voice calm. "You Suna ninjas seem to think you have everyone figured out. But a sandstorm looks different from the inside." Temari's eyes widened slightly. The response was smarter, more measured than she'd expected. She was used to genin who were either terrified of her or openly hostile. This boy was neither. He was simply present. And his presence had a weight to it that she found both infuriating and intriguing. She was a master of gauging her opponents, but she couldn't get a read on him at all. "We'll see who gets lost in the storm during the finals," she said with a smirk, turning to walk away. But as she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been the one who was being analyzed. The month-long break before the finals was a period of intense, focused preparation. Kakashi, grim-faced and serious, devoted his time to reinforcing the seal on Sasuke's curse mark. A delicate and draining procedure. Knowing Naruto needed a teacher who could handle his unique situation, he made a call to an old, familiar contact. That was how Naruto found himself face to face with a towering, white-haired man with red lines painted on his face, who introduced himself with a theatrical kabuki pose. "I am the gallant Jiraiya, the Toad Sage of Mount Myoboku. And Avenue come to train the next generation of—" He stopped mid-sentence, his goofy grin faltering as he truly focused on Naruto for the first time. Jiraiya, one of the 3 legendary Sannin, was a sensor of immense skill. What he felt from the boy was a maelstrom. He felt the raging, chaotic power of the 9 tails, a familiar and dreadful energy. But beneath it, he felt something else. Something he hadn't felt in 50 years. Something he'd only ever heard described in hushed, fearful whispers by the 3rd Hokage. It was a perfectly harmonic, sovereign power, the mythical signature of the Uzumaki royal line. "Well, I'll be." Jiraiya breathed, his entire demeanor changing. The perverted goofball vanished, replaced by the shrewd, hardened gaze of a spymaster and a Sannin. So, it wasn't just a legend. This changed everything. Training this boy was no longer just a favor to Kakashi or a duty to his former student, Minato. It was a matter of global security. Their training was a grueling mix of raw power and subtle control. Jiraiya taught him the principles of the Rasengan, forcing Naruto to push his chakra control to its absolute limit. But interspersed with the explosive power training were quiet, meditative sessions. "That power you have," Jiraiya said one afternoon, as they sat by a river. "It's not just a weapon. It's a voice. Right now, you're screaming with it all the time. You need to learn how to whisper. You need to learn how to be silent." He taught Naruto to feel the edges of his sovereign aura, to consciously pull it in, to mask its presence. He taught him how to project it with intent, not as a wave, but as a focused beam. It was the hardest thing Naruto had ever done, far more difficult than mastering the Rasengan. It was a battle for control of his own soul. The night before the final exams, the village was alive with excitement. Banners hung from buildings, and the streets were crowded with visitors from other lands. Naruto stood atop the 4th Hokage's stone head, looking out over the twinkling lights of the village. This was his home, a home that had scorned him, feared him, and lied to him about his own father. But it was still his. And for the first time, he felt like he had the strength to protect it on his own terms. "Naruto-kun," he turned. Hinata Hyuga stood a few feet away, wringing her hands nervously. I just wanted to say, thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For what you said to Neji-Nisan. No one has ever stood up for me like that. He had no right to talk to you that way," Naruto said simply. I know you will beat him," she continued. A newfound strength in her voice. "Because I've seen it. Everyone talks about the monster inside you, but that's not what I see with my Byakugan. I see a light. It's warm and strong, and it makes other people want to be strong, too." Naruto was stunned into silence. Everyone else saw his power as a threat to be controlled, a tool to be analyzed, or a monster to be feared. But she saw it as something good. Her belief in him was pure, untainted by the supernatural pull of his bloodline. She had felt this way long before the bridge in the land of waves. Her quiet admiration was a genuine connection in a world that was rapidly becoming warped around his power. It was an anchor. He gave her a wide, genuine smile, the first one he'd truly felt in weeks. It was a smile that promised not victory, but change. "Don't worry, Hinata," he said, his voice filled with a calm, unshakable confidence. "I'm not just going to beat him. I'm going to change the way he sees the world." He turned his gaze toward the massive stadium at the center of the village, where the finals would take place. A storm was coming, a storm of sand and conspiracy. But as he stood there, feeling the quiet strength of Hinata's faith behind him and the steady, sovereign power within him, he was not afraid. He was ready. He was no longer just a participant in the Chunin exams. He was a king, ready to claim his court. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5, The Deal with the Devil. The air in the stadium was electric. Tens of thousands of spectators, from the humblest merchants to the fire daimyo himself, filled the stands. Their voices a rolling wave of anticipation. Below, in the cage box, the third Hokage shared a placid smile with his guest, the fourth cage, a tall, gaunt figure whose face was obscured by a wide, veiled hat. The man's stillness was unnerving, a pocket of absolute cold in the sun-drenched arena. Down on the field, Naruto stood opposite Neji Hyuga. The proctor had just stepped back, and a profound silence fell over the massive crowd. Neji's stance was perfect, the picture of Hyuga precision. His pale eyes held the serene confidence of a man who believed the outcome was already written. "Fate has decreed that you will fall here," Neji stated, his voice carrying easily in the stillness. "Give up. You cannot fight destiny." Naruto rolled his shoulders, a simple, fluid motion. He didn't shout. He didn't boast. He just met Neji's gaze, and the memory of Hinata's quiet, unwavering faith was a warm shield around his heart. "Let's find out," he said. The match began. Neji was a blur of motion. A phantom of white and black. He didn't waste a single movement, his every step a calculation. 8 trigrams 64 palms. He declared, his hands striking out with impossible speed, aiming to seal Naruto's chakra network in a single, decisive flurry. Naruto was overwhelmed. He couldn't match the speed, couldn't counter the legendary gentle fist. Clones burst into existence, only to be dispelled with a single, precise tap from Neji's fingertips. The crowd murmured, seeing exactly what they expected, the Hyuga prodigy systematically dismantling the village outcast. From the competitor's box, Sakura watched with a knot in her stomach. "He's too fast," she whispered. Tenten nodded grimly beside her. But as she watched, she noticed something odd. Naruto wasn't panicking. He was being beaten back, yes. But there was a purpose to his retreat, a strategy in his chaos. Neji cornered him against the stadium wall. "It is over." 2 palms. He struck. 4 palms. 8 palms. Each strike landed with pinpoint accuracy. 16 palms. 32 palms. Naruto collapsed, gasping for air, his chakra flow seemingly crippled. "This is the inescapable difference between our realities," Neji said, turning his back as if the fight was already won. "You were a failure from the moment you were born. Don't," a voice rasped from the ground. "Turn your back on me." Neji spun around. Naruto was struggling to his feet, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. But his eyes were burning with an intensity that made the crowd stir. It wasn't just defiance. It was a profound, unshakable certainty. The sovereign ember within him, which had been dormant, began to glow. He didn't need to project it, he just had to be it. The crowd felt it first. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. The dismissive smirks faded. The bored chatter died down. They were suddenly captivated, their attention riveted to the boy in the tattered orange jumpsuit. He wasn't just an underdog anymore. He was a protagonist. "You talk about fate," Naruto said, his voice growing stronger with every word, a resonant baritone that carried to the furthest seats. "You lecture everyone about their cages. But the only one in a cage, Neji, is you. You're trapped by the hatred of your clan's main house, and you're too much of a coward to try and break the bars." The words struck Neji harder than any physical blow. His perfect composure cracked. "You know nothing," he snarled, lunging forward again. This time, Naruto was ready. He exploded into 100 shadow clones, but they didn't attack. They swarmed. They fainted. They sacrificed themselves, creating a chaotic, unpredictable battlefield. And in the middle of it all, the real Naruto was a phantom, his movements no more graceful, but driven by a brilliant, desperate cunning. They clashed again and again. From the stands, Hiyashi Hyuga watched, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of stone. But he saw his NEP. Hugh's flawless technique begin to falter. He saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes as Naruto, against all logic and training, continued to stand, continued to fight, his will an almost tangible force in the arena. Finally, Naruto created his opening. A feint with 2 clones drew Neji's attack, and from directly below, erupting from the ground where he'd been hiding, the real Naruto shot upward, his fist cocked back. It was a simple, brutal uppercut, powered by every ounce of his chakra and his will. It connected with a sickening crack, sending Neji flying into the air and crashing back down to the dirt, unconscious. For a heartbeat, the stadium was silent, stunned. Then, it erupted. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a tidal wave of sound. They weren't just cheering for a victory. They were cheering for the boy who had refused to be broken, the boy who had made them believe, for a fleeting moment, that destiny was a lie. Naruto stood over Neji, his chest heaving. He hadn't just won a fight. He had won the hearts of his village. As the medics carried Neji away, the electronic board spun again, locking onto the most anticipated match of the day, Sasuke Uchiha vs. Gaara of the Sand. Sasuke appeared, his movements sharp and confident despite the pallor of his skin. Gaara manifested on the field like a ghost, his eyes wide with a terrifying, bloodthirsty madness. The fight was a spectacle of power. Sasuke's new Chidori-enhanced speed was breathtaking. Gaara's sand defense was absolute. But as the fight reached its climax, as Sasuke's hand crackled with lightning and plunged toward the sand Jinchuriki, something went wrong. A collective yawn. A soft rustle. And then, white feathers began to drift down from the sky, a beautiful, deadly snowfall. Genjutsu. In the cage box, the cage rose to his feet. An Anbu operative moved to protect the Hokage, but the cage's arm shot out, not with a jutsu, but with a kunai. Hiruzen's eyes widened in shock and betrayal as the blade plunged into his chest. The cage's disguise melted away, revealing the pale, serpentine face of Orochimaru. The signal was given. The invasion of Konoha had begun. Explosions rocked the stadium walls. Suna and Odo shinobi poured in from hidden positions, and the idyllic festival devolved into a battlefield. The civilians screamed, a panicked herd caught in the middle of a predator's war. Most of the Konoha shinobi were still shaking off the genjutsu, their movements sluggish. But Naruto, with the 9 tails in his gut, had his chakra system violently disrupted by the illusion, waking him almost instantly. The chaos, the fear, the screams, it should have overwhelmed him. Instead, a preternatural calm descended. The sovereign power within him, tested by Neji's fatalism and affirmed by the crowd's adoration, surged to the forefront. It wasn't a flare of rage, but a wave of absolute, crystal-clear purpose. Protect them. He didn't need to shout. He projected it. A silent, urgent broadcast of will that cut through the lingering fog of the genjutsu. Sakura, who had just broken the illusion on herself, was about to panic when she felt it, a profound sense of calm, an anchor in the storm. Her eyes found Naruto instantly. He wasn't fighting. He was standing on the arena wall, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield, a general surveying his troops. Sakura. His voice cut through the din. Triage. Set up a medical station near the east gate. Separate the critically wounded from the walking wounded. Go. The command was so clear, so certain, that her panic was vaporized and replaced by resolve. She nodded sharply, already moving, her mind racing with medical ninjutsu procedures. He saw Tenten and her team fending off a group of Odo shinobi on the upper level. Tenten, get to the roof of the main tower. Give me ranged support. Suppressing fire on the west wall. Tenten, who had always seen Naruto as a joke, found herself obeying without a second thought. The sheer authority in his voice was more compelling than any official order. Kurenai Yuhi, having broken the genjutsu on herself and Asuma, was preparing to lead a counterattack when she felt his presence. As like a command post had spontaneously appeared on the battlefield. She saw the genin directing Jonin-level assets and was about to intervene when she realized something astonishing: his plan was working. He was creating order from chaos. His commands turning panicked individuals into a cohesive defensive unit. Even Tamari, who had just received the order from her brother to retreat and begin the second phase of the invasion, felt the pull. She was supposed to be leaving, but every combat instinct she possessed screamed at her that the blonde kid was the most important person on this battlefield. To leave him felt like a tactical blunder, like abandoning the high ground. A scowl of confused fury crossed her face as she found herself caught between her village's orders and the undeniable, infuriating logic of his command. The battle for the stadium was a whirlwind. Naruto became a living command and control center. He wasn't just directing his friends, Jonin and Chunin, sensing the focus of the defense, began to gravitate toward his position, following the commands of a 12-year-old genin because, in the heat of battle, they made more sense than anything else. He saw the whole board, moving pieces with an instinct he never knew he had. But it was not enough. In the center of it all, the third Hokage was trapped in a shimmering purple barrier with Orochimaru, fighting for the life of the village. And Gaara, now partially transformed into the monstrous Shukaku, was escaping the stadium, with Sasuke in hot pursuit. Naruto knew, with that same chilling clarity, where he needed to be. With a final command to Shikamaru to take over coordinating the stadium's defense, a task the lazy genius accepted with a grim, world-weary sigh, Naruto took to the rooftops, chasing the trail of sand and destruction. The hours that followed were a bloody, desperate struggle that stretched across the entire village. Naruto fought and defeated the rampaging Gaara, not by destroying him, but by connecting with him. By reaching the lonely, terrified boy inside the monster. The third Hokage, in a final, heroic act, sacrificed his own life to seal Orochimaru's arms, crippling his former stew. Denton saving the village at the cost of his own. When the dust finally settled, Konoha was still standing. But it was a village scarred, wounded, and without a leader. The sky wept a mournful rain over the shattered rooftops and the grieving people. In the days that followed, a grim pall hung over the leaf. The third's funeral was a somber affair. Naruto stood in the crowd, invisible, the hero of the hour that no one knew. But the wrong people knew. The emergency council meeting was held in a stark, windowless room deep beneath the Hokage Tower. The air was cold. Naruto stood before them, flanked by a grim-faced Kakashi. The village elders, Homura and Kaharu, looked 100 years old. But Danzo Shimura, his face a mask of cold resolve, looked revitalized by the crisis. The village is vulnerable, Danzo began, his voice leaving no room for argument. Hirizen's sentimental policies have left us weak. But we have been shown a path to a new kind of strength. His gaze, a single, black eye, fell upon Naruto. The Jinchuriki's performance during the invasion was exemplary. He organized the defense. He inspired loyalty. He single-handedly defeated the Sand's ultimate weapon. This power he possesses is the greatest strategic asset Konoha has. He let the words hang in the air. An asset this valuable cannot be left to the whims of an unstable, emotional child. It must be honed, controlled, for the good of the village. He slammed the end of his cane on the floor. I propose that Naruto Uzumaki be placed under the direct command and tutelage of my root division. We will strip away his sentimentality, his attachments. We will mold him into the perfect, unwavering shield of Konoha. An ultimate weapon that will guarantee our supremacy for the next century. Kakashi stiffened, his hand moving subconsciously toward his kunai pouch. This was a coup, a quiet, political assassination of Naruto's very soul. Homura and Kaharu, their faces etched with the fear of another war, looked at each other. Hirizen's death had shattered their confidence. Danzo's proposal, as monstrous as it was, sounded like a guarantee of survival. The measure is extreme, Kaharu said, but her voice lacked conviction. But in these times, there is another way. The doors to the council chamber slammed open. Jiraiya stood there, his arms crossed, his usual smirk absent. And beside him, her NDE hair and formidable presence filling the room, was Tsunade Senju, the last of the legendary Sannin. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the council, lingering on Danzo with open hostility before finally settling on Naruto. She felt it instantly. A warmth, a pressure, a sense of innate authority that resonated with her own powerful chakra. But where others felt our deference, she, a Senju, the granddaughter of the first Hokage, felt a sense of equilibrium. It was a power she could recognize, analyze, and, if necessary, match. You talk about him like he's a sword to be sharpened, Tsunade said. Her voice laced with contempt as she strode into the room. You're a fool, Danzo. You think his power is in his chakra. His real power is in the will that directs it. The will that made him stand up to Neji Hyuga. The will that made him face Shukaku. You put him in your little box of horrors, and you'll break the very thing that makes him strong. You won't have a weapon, you'll have a broken shell. She stopped directly in front of the council table, her knuckles resting on the wood. The position of 5th Hokage is now vacant. I am claiming it. The declaration was a thunderclap in the small room. And as my first act, I am taking personal responsibility for Naruto Uzumaki. He will not be your lab rat. He will not be your mindless weapon. He will be my apprentice. My bodyguard. He will learn control, medicine, and politics at my side, where I can keep an eye on him. She shot a glare at Danzo. And where I can keep your vultures away from him. It was a brilliant, audacious power play. She had offered them a deal with a different kind of devil. They could have Danzo's weapon, or they could have the 5th Hokage's chosen successor, shielded from their influence but bound to the village's highest authority. The elders were stunned into silence. Danzo's eye narrowed, a flicker of cold fury in its depths. He had been outmaneuvered. Tsunade turned her gaze to Naruto. She wasn't asking him, she was assessing him. The choice is yours, brat, she said, her tone gruff. Danzo's cage, or mine. Either way, your life as a simple genin is over. Naruto looked from Danzo's cold, possessive stare to Tsunade's fierce, challenging one. He saw two paths laid out before him. One led to a dark, hollow existence as a tool. The other was a steep, uncertain climb at the side of a legend. It was the easiest choice he had ever made. He met the gaze of the woman who would be Hokage, his own eyes clear and resolved. I'm with you, Granny Tsunade. A ghost of a smirk touched her lips. The deal was struck, and in the cold, silent chamber, the political landscape of the Hidden Leaf Village had been irrevocably altered. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6, The Parting of Ways. Tsunade's reign as Hokage began not with a ceremony, but with a tidal wave of paperwork and a sea of political sharks. The Hokage's office, once a place of quiet contemplation for the Third, became a bustling command center. Stacks of mission scrolls, damage reports, and diplomatic correspondence threatened to consume the desk, but Tsunade plowed through them with the same ferocious energy she applied to a battlefield. And at her side, a silent, watchful presence, was Naruto. His life had been upended. He was no longer just a genin. He was the Hokage's apprentice, a title that carried no official rank but infinite weight. His days were spent in the heart of Konoha's power structure, observing tense negotiations with foreign dignitaries, listening to Jonin commanders deliver intelligence reports, and learning the intricate, often ugly machinery of what it took to run a hidden village. He was a sponge, absorbing everything. The sovereign aura within him, which had once been a wild, reactive force, was being tamed through this constant exposure to true authority. Under Tsunade's gruff tutelage and Jiraiya's unorthodox meditative exercises, he learned to pull it inward, to cloak its presence until it was a mere whisper. The change was palpable. He no longer felt like a walking beacon, he felt like himself, but with a core of unshakable steel. This new reality was a source of endless friction for Sasuke Uchiha. Confined to the hospital, his body recovering from the invasion and his mind wrestling with the venomous cursed seal on his shoulder, he watched Naruto's ascent with a burning, acid jealousy. He would see him walking the halls of the tower with Tsunade, a silent guard at her back. He would hear the whispers of the nurses, the awe in their voices as they recounted the story. From the stadium, how the dead last had organized the entire defense. The final insult came during a visit from Sakura and Ino. They brought him flowers, their faces etched with a familiar, cloying concern. But the conversation inevitably drifted. You should have seen him, Sasuke-kun, Ino said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. During the invasion, it was like he was a different person. Everyone was panicking, but he was so calm. He just knew what to do. He told me exactly where to set up the triage station, Sakura added, a flicker of that same awe in her eyes. And he was right. We saved dozens of lives because of it. Quote. Sasuke's fists clenched under the thin hospital blanket. It was always him. Naruto. The Dobi. The outcast. He was supposed to be the one they looked at with awe. He was the prodigy. The last of the noble Uchiha. But they weren't looking at him now, they were looking past him, at the rising star of his rival. He saw the respect in their eyes when they spoke of Naruto. And his pride twisted it into something ugly. He saw it as the Bloodline's allure, a cheap trick that was stealing the admiration that was rightfully his. The tension finally snapped on the hospital rooftop. Sasuke, having discharged himself against medical advice, had demanded Naruto meet him there. The air was cool, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I want to see it, Sasuke said. His voice low and dangerous. This new power of yours. The power that has everyone in this village acting like you're some kind of king. Naruto stood opposite him, his expression calm. He had felt this confrontation coming for weeks. He consciously kept his sovereign aura suppressed, tucked away in his core. He didn't want this to be a battle of wills, he wanted to talk to his friend. This isn't about power, Sasuke. It's about protecting our home. Don't lecture me about home. Sasuke snarled, his Sharingan flaring to life. You know nothing of loss. I need power to kill him. The power Orochimaru offered me. The power you're hoarding for yourself. He lunged, his movements a blur of pent-up frustration. He was faster, stronger than he had been in the exams, He cursed seal a dark amplifier for his rage. He expected Naruto to meet him with a roar of chakra, a messy flurry of clones. Instead, Naruto met him with a quiet, efficient defense. He flowed around Sasuke's strikes, parrying and redirecting, his movements devoid of wasted energy. It wasn't the brawling of a dead last, it was the controlled taijutsu of a trained bodyguard. This infuriated Sasuke more than any counterattack could have. Naruto's composure felt like pity. His control felt like arrogance. Fight me, Sasuke roared, black markings beginning to snake across his skin from the cursed seal. Stop holding back. He gathered his chakra, the familiar, piercing shriek of 1,000 birds filling the air. Chidori. Naruto's eyes hardened. He saw the genuine killing intent in Sasuke's attack. With a sigh of resignation, he raised his own hand, a swirling sphere of blue chakra grinding into existence. Rasengan. They charged. Two brothers in all but blood, hurtling toward a collision that would shatter their world. Stop it. A blur of green and gray appeared between them. Kakashi caught each of their attacks, his hands smoking from the raw power he had just intercepted. He threw them apart, their respective jutsus exploding against the rooftop's water towers, blasting them to smithereens. What do you two think you're doing? Kakashi's voice was colder than Naruto had ever heard it. But his Sharingan eye was fixed on Sasuke, and the look in it was one of profound disappointment. Sasuke stared at the hole his Chidori had torn in the metal, then at the much larger gouge. D-out crater Naruto's Rasengan had created. The evidence was undeniable. Even with the cursed seal, his rival's power was greater. The last thread of his patience snapped. The choice was made. That night, under the pale light of a crescent moon, Sasuke Uchiha walked away from everything he had ever known. He was stopped at the village gates by Sakura. Tears streamed down her face, a heartbreaking, desperate plea. Please, Sasuke-kun, don't go. I love you. If you stay, I'll make you happy every day, I'll do anything. Just, don't leave me alone. Sasuke turned, his face a cold, impassive mask. You're annoying. A sharp blow to the back of her neck, and she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. He didn't look back. When Sakura was found, she was brought directly to the Hokage's office. Her artful plea to Tsunade was quickly relayed to Naruto, who was summoned immediately. The weight of her words fell on him like a physical blow. You're the only one he might listen to, Naruto, she sobbed. Everyone listens to you now. Please, it's a promise of a lifetime. Bring him back. The plea was heavier this time. It wasn't just the desperate request of a girl with a crush. It was a plea to the person she now instinctively saw as the pillar of their world. It was a test. Tsunade's face was grim. An Uchiha defection to Orochimaru was a catastrophic intelligence breach. She looked at Naruto. seeing not just the distraught friend, but the apprentice she had been training. She saw the leader he was becoming. "Shikamaru Nara will lead the retrieval team," Tsunade declared, making a rapid-fire decision. "He will choose his squad. Naruto, you are the core of this mission. You are the Fang." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone that was meant for him alone. "Your orders are to retrieve Sasuke Uchiha. But this is not an Anbu assassination. Do not break him. But more importantly, do not let him break you. You are the future of this village. Bring the Uchiha back, but not at the cost of that future. Understood?" "Yes, Lady Hokage," Naruto said, his voice a low, steady rumble of resolve. The pursuit was a bloody, desperate race against time. One by one, Shikamaru's hand-picked squad, Neji, Choji, Kiba, peeled off to engage the members of the Sound Four, each buying precious time with their own blood and bone. Each sacrifice propelled Naruto forward. His focus narrowed to a single point on the horizon. He was not just chasing a friend. He was chasing a ghost, a mirror image of what he could have become if not for the bonds he had forged. He understood Sasuke's craving for power. The gnawing emptiness that only strength could seem to fill. He finally caught up to him in a place where history and destiny converged, the Valley of the End. The T.W.O. colossal statues of Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha loomed over them, silent witnesses to another battle between brothers, another clash between loyalty and ambition. "So you came," Sasuke said, turning from the water's edge. The cursed seal had spread, his skin a sickly gray, his eyes a terrifying yellow, his hair long and wild. He looked like a demon. "Did you come to stop me, or to finally prove you're better than me?" "I came to take you home," Naruto said simply. The battle that followed was not a sparring match. It was a cataclysm. It was a clash of ideals given terrifying, physical form. Sasuke, empowered by the second stage of the cursed seal, was a creature of horrifying speed and power, his Chidori now a black, crackling blade of pure hatred. Naruto, pushed to his limit, finally gave in to the whispers of the fox. The red chakra exploded from him, forming a shroud, then a tail. The raw, demonic power was a furnace inside him, but his mind, for the first time, remained clear. The sovereign ember at his core was not extinguished by the Kyuubi's rage, it was fanned by it, a golden sun in the heart of a crimson storm. They fought on the water, across the stone faces of the founders. Their blows shaking the very foundations of the valley. It was a battle of equals, a perfect storm of hatred and love, of rivalry and brotherhood. As they prepared for their final, cataclysmic attacks, Sasuke's black Chidori against Naruto's vermilion Rasengan, Naruto did something that defied all combat logic. He reached out not with his chakra, but with his will. He consciously, deliberately, unleashed the full force of his sovereign's charm. But he shaped it. It wasn't the commanding aura of the stadium or the defiant shield he had used against Orochimaru. He poured every ounce of his memory and emotion into it. The wave of power that washed over Sasuke was not one of authority. It was a wave of pure, undiluted connection. Sasuke felt it slam into him, more jarring than any physical blow. His mind was flooded. He felt the phantom chill of the land of waves, the warmth of Naruto's body shielding him from Haku's needles. He tasted the cheap pork ramen from Ichiraku, heard the sound of their bickering with Sakura. He felt the shared exhaustion after training, the grudging respect after the bell test. For a fraction of a second, the monstrous rage of the cursed seal was drowned out by the overwhelming, undeniable truth of their bond. It was a desperate, silent plea from one brother to another, remember. The vision shattered, but it was too late. Sasuke's concentration had been broken for a critical instant. Their jutsus collided. The explosion was apocalyptic, a sphere of violent, purple energy that ripped the valley apart. When the light faded, Naruto stood over a defeated, unconscious Sasuke. His own arm broken and bleeding, the Kyuubi's chakra receding. He had won. The physical battle was over. He looked down at his friend, his rival, lying broken at his feet. The mission was to bring him back. He could do it. He could pick him up, throw him over his shoulder, and carry him back to Konoha. He could fulfill his promise to Sakura. He could obey the letter of his orders. But he remembered Tsunade's words, do not break him. He looked at Sasuke's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, and saw the deep, agonizing conflict that had driven him here. To drag him back now, as a prisoner. A defeated traitor would be to shatter his pride completely. It would break his spirit, leaving behind an empty shell of resentment. He would be a caged Uchiha, a weapon in a box. Just as Danzo had wanted Naruto to be. He would be saving Sasuke's body at the cost of his soul. With a clarity that was painful and absolute, Naruto understood. Some choices cannot be made for others. A king cannot force a man to be free. Slowly, Naruto bent down. He reached out and gently picked up Sasuke's discarded Konoha headband, the metal plate scarred with a deep scratch from their battle. He clutched it in his hand. The metal cooled against his skin. He turned and began the long, lonely walk back to the village, leaving his brother to his chosen darkness. He had failed his mission, but he had honored his friend. It was a leader's choice, a hard choice, a choice that would haunt him for years to come. He returned not as a victor, but as a king who had just learned the true, bitter cost of his crown. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Whispers of the Silent Dawn. The wind that swept across the plains leading to the land of fire carried the scent of home. For 2.5 years, that scent had been a phantom. A memory pursued across countless miles of foreign roads. Now, it was real. Naruto Uzumaki, 16 years old and taller by a head, breathed it in. The vibrant orange of Hi's youth had been replaced by a more subdued black and orange jacket, the fabric worn from travel and training. The childish roundness of his face had given way to a sharper jawline, and his blue eyes, once wide with a desperate need for attention, were now calm, observant, and held a depth that spoke of battles fought and lessons learned. Feeling sentimental, brat. Jiraiya's voice was a low rumble beside him. The Sannin looked no different, a timeless mountain of a man, but the goofy pervert persona he showed the world was a carefully constructed mask. On the road, Naruto had come to know the spymaster, the strategist. The man who carried the weight of a world on his shoulders. Just ready for a decent bowl of ramen, Naruto replied, a faint smile touching his lips. He didn't need to project his power anymore. It was a part of him now, a quiet, foundational strength, like the bedrock beneath a mountain. He could feel its edges, pull it in so tight that it was undetectable, or let it rest just beneath his skin. A subtle pressure that discouraged trouble before it began. Their arrival at the main gates of Konoha was quiet. The eternal gate guards, Izumo and Katetsu, were playing a lazy game of shogi. They looked up, saw the familiar white hair of the Sannin, and then their eyes fell on the young man beside him. There was a flicker of recognition, then a double take. This was the Uzumaki kid, but not. As Naruto walked past, both Chunin unconsciously straightened their backs, their game forgotten. It wasn't a formal salute, but a flicker of instinctual deference, an unspoken acknowledgement of presence. It was the same way they reacted when Lord Hiashi or one of the clan heads passed. They didn't know why they did it, it just felt appropriate. Standing just inside the gate, as if she had been waiting, was Sakura Haruno. The years had been just as transformative for her. Her hair was shorter, more practical. She wore the standard Chunin flak jacket with a confidence that was entirely new. The last vestiges of the insecure girl who chased after Sasuke were gone, replaced by the quiet, formidable presence of a medic nin who had been personally trained by the 5th Hokage. Her hands, which had once only known how to form seals for basic jutsu, were now instruments of healing and devastating force. Their eyes met. For a moment, there was just the quiet shock of seeing how much the other had changed. Then, a genuine, warm smile spread across Sakura's face. Welcome home, Naruto. He felt the pull. Her chakra, which had grown immensely under Tsunade's tutelage, resonated with his own power. It was a low, constant hum of awareness, a magnetic draw that was stronger than ever before. But she didn't blush or fawn. Her own strength, her own discipline, provided an anchor. She felt the pull, acknowledged it as a strange, inexplicable fact of his existence, and stood her ground against it. It was a testament to her own growth. It's good to be back, Sakura, he said, his own smile easy and real. The reunion was cut short. They reported directly to the Hokage's office. Tsunade sat behind her mountain of paperwork, a bottle of sake conspicuously absent. She looked up as they entered, and her stern expression softened for a fraction of a second. She saw not the brash genin she had taken under her wing, but a young man who radiated a controlled, dependable power. She saw the future she had gambled on. You're late, she said, her tone all business. The report, Jiraiya. Jiraiya's demeanor shifted, becoming deadly serious. He tossed a thin, unassuming scroll onto the desk. The Akatsuki are on the move. They'll start hunting the Jinchuriki in earnest within the year. But there's something else. Something new. He leaned forward, his voice low. I've picked up whispers. All across the continent. A new group, operating in the shadows. They call themselves the Cult of the Silent Dawn. They're not rogue ninjas seeking power or wealth. They're fanatics. Zealots. They've been responsible for a string of political assassinations and destabilization efforts in smaller nations, all seemingly unconnected. But the pattern is there if you look for it. They are eroding the political foundations of the world, preparing for something big. What did they want? Tsunade asked, her eyes narrowed. That's the problem. No one knows. Their operatives fight with a strange, corrosive chakra that poisons everything it touches. And they don't allow themselves to be captured. Every single one we've managed to corner has self-destructed, their bodies dissolving into a black, chakra-nullifying ash. Naruto listened, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This was the world he had been training to face. Not just powerful ninja, but ideologies, movements that moved like plagues in the darkness. As if on cue, an Anbu operative appeared in the room in a swirl of leaves, kneeling before the Hokage. Lady Fifth, an urgent message from the land of Tea. Lord Masaru, the head of their primary trade council, was assassinated last night. His daughter, Kiku, has taken his place and has formally requested an elite Konoha protection detail. She believes she is the next target. Tsunade's eyes flicked from the Anbu to Jiraiya's report, then to Naruto. The pieces clicked into place with grim certainty. The land of Tea is our most vital trade partner for medical herbs. Destabilizing them would cripple our hospital and our entire medical corps. This has the cult's signature all over it. She stood up, her decision made. Team Kakashi is hereby reformed for an A- rank protection mission. Sakura, you're the team medic. Naruto, you're the tip of the spear. She paused. Your third member is waiting outside. He's from a different department. But his skills are suited for this kind of work. Outside the office stood a boy their age with unnervingly pale skin and a fake, painted-on smile. He wore a cropped flak jacket that exposed his midriff and carried a short tanto on his back. My name is Sai, he said, his smile never wavering. It will be a pleasure to work with you both. I've read your files. You are the Jinchuriki powerhouse, and you are the medical specialist. I look forward to observing your assets. Naruto and Sakura exchanged a look. The boy's chakra felt blank, suppressed. His words were hollow. He was a root operative. Danzo's lingering shadow, a spy in their midst. Tsunade was testing them, forcing them to work with a viper in their own squad. The land of Tea was beautiful and tense. The vibrant greens of the tea fields were a stark contrast to the paranoid, whispering atmosphere of the capital city. Their client, Kiku, was a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a will of iron. She greeted them not as saviors, but as hired help. Her grief for her father locked away behind a mask of cool professionalism. I'm glad Konoha's legendary 5th Hokage took my request seriously, she said, her gaze sweeping over them, lingering for a moment on Naruto. Though I confess, I expected older veterans. We're the team she sent, Naruto replied, his tone polite but firm. His aura was pulled in tight, a quiet hum that was felt more than seen. Kiku felt a strange, inexplicable urge to trust his words, an instinct that warred with her natural caution. The assassination attempt came on the second night. It wasn't an explosion or a frontal assault. It was silence. Kakashi, on watch, noticed a faint, sweet smell in the air vents. Sai's ink animals, which he used as sentries, dissolved into puddles. Poison gas. Kakashi yelled, shattering a window to vent the room. Sakura was already moving, her hands glowing with green chakra. It's a fast-acting neurotoxin. Everyone, hold your breath. She created a small dome of purified air around Kiku. Her medical expertise a shield against the invisible threat. Naruto moved to the door, Rasengan in hand. The attack wasn't meant to kill them all, it was a feint, designed to flush them out. As he burst into the hallway, a figure dropped from the ceiling, a pair of serrated blades glinting in the moonlight. It was a Kunoichi, clad in black, her face hidden by a porcelain mask adorned with a spiral symbol. She was fast, her movements fluid and deadly. She flowed around Naruto's initial attack, her blades aimed at his throat. He met her with a ferocity that surprised her, his taijutsu refined and precise. They were evenly matched. As they fought, Naruto felt the familiar tug of his power reacting to a strong opponent. A sliver of the sovereign aura leaked out, a defensive pulse of pure will. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The masked Kunoichi, in the middle of a lethal strike, faltered. Her eyes, visible through the slits in her mask, widened in what looked like utter, soul-shaking awe. Her body, honed into a perfect killing machine, froze for a half-second, her killing intent completely vanishing, replaced by a wave of stunned reverence. It was all the opening Naruto needed. He didn't strike to kill. He slammed the pommel of his kunai into her wrist, disarming her, and followed with a sweep that took her off her feet. He had her pinned before she could even process what had happened. "It's over," he said. The woman stared up at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The awe in her eyes was quickly being replaced by a fanatic's horror, as if she had just committed a profound blasphemy. "The sovereign, it's real," she whispered, her voice filled with a terrifying mix of reverence and despair. Before Naruto or Kakashi could question her, she bit down hard. A surge of black, corrosive chakra erupted from her body. It wasn't like a normal jutsu, it felt dead, empty, a void that consumed life. "Get back," Kakashi yelled, pulling Naruto away. The woman's body convulsed, then dissolved with terrifying speed, leaving behind nothing but a scorch mark on the floor and a lingering, acrid smell of ozone and decay. Silence descended on the hallway. Sai's painted smile was gone, replaced by a look of genuine, analytical curiosity. Sakura stared at the spot where the assassin had been, her medical instincts recoiling from the sheer wrongness of the chakra she had felt. Naruto stood, staring at his hands. The woman had been strong, a Jonin-level opponent. But she had frozen, not from fear, but from something else. And she had called him the sovereign. Jiraiya was right, Kakashi said, his voice grim. They don't get taken alive. He knelt, examining the scorch mark. This chakra, it's designed to erase them completely. Who are these people? Naruto looked toward Kiku's room. The young daimyo was standing in the doorway, her professional mask shattered. She had seen the fight. She had seen the assassin falter before him. She was staring at Naruto now. Not as a hired bodyguard, but as something else, something she couldn't comprehend. The same awe he had seen in the assassin's eyes was now reflected, fainter but undeniably present, in hers. They had survived the night, but the mission had changed. They weren't just protecting a client from assassins anymore. They had kicked a hornet's nest, and that nest belonged to a cult that knew his name. A cult that worshipped a silent god and was willing to dissolve into nothingness for their cause. The upcoming trade summit was no longer just a political meeting. It was a hunting ground. And Naruto Uzumaki, for reasons he was only beginning to understand, was the prey. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8, The Corrupted Court. The scorch mark on the floor was a dead end. Kakashi's investigation, aided by Sai's unnervingly precise sketches of the assassin's attire, yielded only a single, tantalizing clue. A tiny, fire-resistant fiber from the woman's glove, missed in her self-immolation, was embroidered with a microscopic, coded character. It was a character Sai recognized from his root indoctrination, a dead drop marker, an archaic cipher used for deniable assets. The code indicates a handoff of information. Sai explained, his tone as flat as if he were describing the weather. The recipient is a trade minister from the land of Nek, scheduled to attend the Fire Daimyo's tri-annual Grand Summit. The summit begins in 3 days. The mission's parameters shifted in an instant. This was no longer about a single client in a provincial nation. The tendrils of the conspi racy reached into the very heart of the land of fire, into the opulent, treacherous court of the daimyo himself. Kiku, their client, refused to be sidelined. "My father was killed because of these trade negotiations," she stated. Her voice cold and hard as she stood before Kakashi. This cult didn't just want him dead, they wanted to disrupt the alliances he was building. "I will not hide while they dismantle his life's work. I am attending that summit." Her gaze drifted to Naruto. Since the attack, a new, complex awareness had settled in her eyes whenever she looked at him. The instinctual true saint she'd felt was now colored with a profound, almost fearful respect. She had seen the assassin, a creature of pure killing intent, falter before him as if facing a god. She didn't understand it, but she knew that proximity to him was the safest place in the world. Kakashi weighed his options. Protecting Kiku in the viper's nest of the daimyo's court was a nightmare scenario. But she was right. She was the bait they needed. "We go," he said finally. "But the moment we arrive, you don't breathe without my say-so. We are no longer bodyguards, we are a counter-intelligence unit." The Fire Capita. L was a world away from the grit and discipline of Konoha. It was a city of silks and whispers, of gilded rooftops and shadowed alleys where political careers were made and broken. The daimyo's palace was an explosion of color and wealth. The air thick with the scent of incense and the sound of courtly music. The grand summit had drawn nobles, merchants, and shinobi liaisons from a dozen nations. And the atmosphere crackled with ambition and paranoia. The moment Team Kakashi entered the grand hall for the opening reception, Naruto felt it. With his sovereign aura pulled in tight, a shield of normalcy around him. He was still a magnet. The ambient chakra in the room, particularly the potent reserves of the elite Kunoichi serving as the daimyo's royal guard, seemed to bend in his direction. Gazes lingered. Conversations faltered as he passed. It wasn't overt, but it was a constant, low-level hum of attention that set his teeth on edge. Sakura felt it too, and it made her hackles rise. She positioned herself at his side. A subtle but clear gesture of possessiveness. She saw the way a court lady's fan stilled as Naruto passed, the way a veteran Kunoichi guard unconsciously tracked his movements. It was the bridge in the land of waves, magnified 100 times. "Your presence creates interesting social dynamics," Sai observed from his other side, his fake smile firmly in place. He was cataloging every reaction with the detached curiosity of an entomologist studying a strange new insect. "The females of a certain power level seem to exhibit a pack bonding instinct in your vicinity. It's quite inefficient." "Shut up, Sai," Sakura muttered, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. They identified their target easily, a sweating, nervous minister from the land of Nek who kept darting glances at the exits. But as Kakashi moved to shadow him, it became clear the man was a pawn, a distraction. The real threat was holding court in the center of the room. His name was Lord Tensai. He was handsome, charismatic. His voice a smooth, modulated baritone that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised. He was surrounded by a rapt audience of delegates from smaller nations. His words weaving a compelling narrative of oppression. "For generations, we have been told that peace is a fragile thing, preserved only by the overwhelming power of the great hidden villages," Tensai said. His hands gesturing with an artist's grace. "But I ask you, is a peace maintained by the threat of mutually assured destruction truly peace? Or is it merely a ceasefire, held hostage by the hymns of Jinchuriki and the genetic lottery of bloodlines?" His gaze swept the room, and for a moment, it seemed to lock onto Naruto. "We see these beings, these living weapons, these titans of chakra, and we are told they are our shields. But a shield can be turned, a weapon can be aimed. What happens when the will of one being, simply by existing, can sway the hearts of others? Is that leadership? Or is it a form of tyranny more subtle and insidious than any army?" The words were a direct assault, cloaked in the language of philosophy. He wasn't just attacking Naruto, he was attacking the very concept of the shinobi system. And he was winning the hearts of those who felt crushed by it. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed. This was their man. This was the voice of the Silent Dawn. As Tensai's speech reached its crescendo, Naruto felt a change in the air. A new chakra signature bloomed from Tensai's position, an energy that felt ancient, natural, yet profoundly wrong. It was sage chakra, but it had been twisted, corrupted. It felt like sweet, rotting fruit. It spread through the hall not as a wave of power, but as a poisonous mist, a whisper that wrapped around the hearts of those it touched. And it touched the Kunoichi of the Royal Guard. Naruto felt it happen. The subtle pull they already felt toward him was seized, amplified, and warped into something monstrous. A guard standing near the daimyo's dais, a woman with a hard, professional face, suddenly stiffened. Her eyes, which had been scanning the crowd, locked onto Naruto, and a crazed, possessive light bloomed within them. The attraction became obsession. The respect became fanaticism. "He is here," she whispered, her voice a low, guttural growl. Another guard, then a third, turned. Their movements grew jerky, their discipline shattering. The subtle positive connection they felt to Naruto's sovereign aura was being used as a conduit for Tensai's poison, twisting their protective instincts into a violent, paranoid madness. The first guard moved. She didn't attack Tensai. She didn't attack the daimyo. She drew her blade and lunged at Kakashi, who was standing beside Naruto. Traitor! The guard screamed, her face a mask of fury. You stand too close to the sovereign. You seek to control him. He belongs to us. Chaos erupted. The other afflicted guards turned, not on the crowd, but on Naruto's allies. They saw Sakura, Sai, and Kakashi as rivals. As impurities that needed to be purged from their new god's presence. The hall devolved into a screaming panic as the elite royal guard, protectors of the peace, turned on each other and on Team Kakashi. What is this? Sakura yelled, parrying a savage blow from a guard she had been chatting with moments earlier. It's like they've all gone insane. Tensai stood back, a serene, knowing smile on his face. He had orchestrated this perfectly. He had created a crisis that only Naruto could solve, and any action Naruto took would prove Tensai's point. If he fought back, if he used his power to dominate them, he would become the tyrant Tensai had described. If he did nothing, his allies would be killed. It was a perfect trap. Naruto stared at the scene, horrified. He could see the agony in the guards' eyes, their minds trapped within a cage of corrupted emotion. He could feel their twisted, desperate adoration, a grotesque parody of the loyalty he inspired. He could end this in a second. 100 shadow clones, a few well-placed Rasengans, and the fight would be over. But these were Konoha shinobi. They were victims. Don't be a hammer, Jiraiya's voice echoed in his memory. Be the silence. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos. He ignored the screams, the clash of steel. He reached deep inside, to the golden, sun-like core of his power. He didn't gather it for an attack. He didn't shape it into a command. He simply released it. He let the sovereign's charm flow out of him, not as a wave of force, but as a gentle, pervasive hum. He poured every ounce of calm he possessed into it. Every memory of sitting by the river with Jiraiya, every feeling of peace he had ever known. He broadcasted a single, silent, undeniable message: you are safe. There is no threat. Be still. It was a sovereign's bomb. A king's peace. The effect was not instantaneous, but it was profound. A Kunoichi, her sword raised to strike down Sai, faltered. The crazed light in her eyes flickered, replaced by a wave of confusion. The obsessive, paranoid rage that had been screaming in her mind was being soothed by a powerful, external calm. Her muscles trembled, her sword arm slowly lowering. Across the room, the same thing was happening. The violence didn't stop, but it lost its conviction. The wild, frenzied attacks became hesitant, confused. Naruto's aura wasn't breaking Tensai's control. But it was treating the symptoms, pouring a cooling balm over the feverish minds of the guards. It gave Kakashi and the other loyal shinobi the opening they needed. They moved with swift, non-lethal precision, disarming and subduing the now confused Kunoichi without causing serious injury. Tensai's smile vanished. His eyes widened with a look of pure, unadulterated fascination. He had expected a beast. A tyrant, a hammer. He had just witnessed a healer, a shepherd, a power that could soothe hearts as easily as it could command them. This was a power far greater, and far more dangerous to his plans than he had ever imagined. Incredible, he whispered to himself. Before the remaining loyal guards could surround him, a smoke bomb detonated at Tensai's feet. His followers in the court, a dozen seemingly unconnected nobles and merchants, drew weapons, creating a massive diversion. In the ensuing chaos, Tensai was gone. The smoke cleared to reveal a scene of utter disarray. The summit was ruined. The daimyo had been whisked away to safety. And Naruto stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by the dazed and weeping royal guards, their minds now their own but still reeling from the violation. Sai stood a few feet away, his tanto half drawn. His painted smile was gone, and for the first time since they had met him, his face was a mask of genuine, unfeigned shock. He had been raised in root, taught that emotions were weaknesses to be exploited or purged. He had just witnessed Naruto weaponize an emotion, not anger, not hatred, but a profound sense of peace. He had commanded not with fear, but with tranquility. Sai's entire worldview, the bedrock of his training and existence, had a hairline fracture running through it. Naruto looked across the ruined hall, at the chaos Tensai had wrought. He had won the battle, saved the guards, and protected his friends. But he had lost the war. Tensai had escaped, and he had revealed the true, terrifying scope of his power to his enemy. This was no longer just about assassins in the dark. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle for the soul of the shinobi world, and Lord Tensai had just declared himself the opposition king. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9, The Sovereign's Gambit. The fallout from the Grand Summit was immediate and catastrophic. Tensai's perfectly orchestrated chaos didn't just disrupt a meeting. It shattered the fragile trust between the smaller nations and the great hidden villages. His words, amplified by the shocking display of the royal guards, instability, spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into accusations. Delegates returned to their homes with stories of Konoha's living weapons and their terrifying, mind-altering abilities. Trade agreements faltered. Alliances frayed. The political landscape of the continent, which had been trending toward a fragile peace, was suddenly tilting back toward paranoia and isolationism. Tsunade's office was the epicenter of the storm. Naruto stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, a mirror of the turmoil brewing outside Konoha's walls. In the weeks since their return, intelligence reports had painted a grim picture. The cult of the Silent Dawn, which had once operated in the deepest shadows, was stepping into the light. Emboldened by Tensai's success, they began to openly recruit, preying on the fears he had so expertly stoked. Disgruntled shinobi, disillusioned nobles, and citizens weary of living in the shadow of Jinchuriki began to flock to their banner, drawn by the promise of a world without monsters. A world ruled by a just and silent god. "They're making a play for the land of frost," Jiraiya said, his voice a low growl. He unrolled a map across Tsunade's desk, its surface already littered with markers and strategic notations. Frost sits on the primary trade route to the northern territories. If they take it, they can choke off supplies to half a dozen of our allies. And their leader, Daimyo Chiryaku, has always been a vocal critic of the hidden village system. He's ripe for Tensai's rhetoric. Worse, Tsunade added, tapping a finger on a different point on the map. The land of iron. The samurai have declared a state of neutrality, but their general, Mifune, has agreed to host a global conference to address the growing threat of weaponized chakra. Tensai has been invited to speak. He's using our own political systems against us. He's not just building an army, Naruto said, turning from the window. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of the two Sannin. He's starting a world war. Not with soldiers, but with ideas. He's making the world choose a side. And the world was choosing. Border skirmishes, once rare, were now a daily occurrence. A Kumo Patro. L would clash with an Iwa scouting party. Mist Anbu would be found dead on Suna's borders. Each incident was small, deniable, but they were all part of the same pattern, a slow, deliberate escalation. Pushing the great nations toward the brink of open conflict. Tensai was setting the board, preparing to unleash his true forces into the chaos he had created. The breaking point came with a single, dead message intercepted by Jiraiya's spy network. It was a fragment of a command, but its meaning was terrifyingly clear. The dawn is breaking. The silence is coming. The first seal shatters. The sealing temple of the void. Jiraiya whispered, his face pale. It's an ancient Uzumaki temple, hidden in the mountains on the border of the land of whirlpools. It doesn't hold a tailed beast. Legend says it holds something older. A primordial entity the Uzumaki clan sealed away before the age of the Sage of Six Paths. The silent god. This is it, Tsunade said, her voice grim. This has been the endgame all along. The political destabilization, the border conflicts, it's all a diversion. He's forcing the great nations to look at each other, while his real army makes a move on the temple. The impossible choice was laid bare before them. Konoha could not send its main forces to the temple. To do so would be to leave the village vulnerable, to show their hand and risk a full-scale invasion from Iwa or Kumo. Who would see it as a sign of weakness? But they could not ignore the threat. Then we don't use the main forces, Naruto said, his voice ringing with a sudden, startling clarity. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, every lesson learned at Tsunade's side and on the road with Jiraiya, had led him to this moment. We don't play his game. He stepped forward, his presence filling the room not with pressure, but with an unshakable sense of purpose. Lady Hokage, I request permission to enact the sovereign's gambit. Tsunade and Jiraiya stared at him. The Sovereign's gambit was a theoretical strategy, a wild, desperate plan they had devised during his training, a contingency for a world-ending threat. It was a plan built entirely around Naruto's unique ability, a gamble of such epic proportions that they had never truly believed they would have to use it. Naruto, you understand what you're asking, Tsunade said, her voice tight. You would be making yourself the CNGLE most valuable, and vulnerable, target on the planet. I'm already the target, he countered. Tensai proved that. This is just the first time I get to choose the battlefield. His conviction was absolute. After a long, tense moment, Tsunade gave a single, sharp nod. The die was cast. The call went out, not through official channels, but through personal connections and back-alley messengers. It wasn't a call to arms from the Hokage. It was a personal summons from Naruto Uzumaki. He called upon the genin he had fought alongside in the Chunin exams. He called upon the Anbu, like the weasel-masked woman, who had felt his power firsthand. He called upon the Kunoichi from the daimyo's court who owed him their sanity. He called upon Kiku from the land of tea, and through her, a network of loyalists her father had cultivated. He even sent a message to the Sand siblings, not as an ally, but as the one who had saved their Casecage's soul. It was a call to an army of individuals, bound not by village loyalty, but by a personal connection to him. They gathered in a hidden valley days later, a motley, chaotic assembly of shinobi from a half-dozen nations. There were Konoha loyalists like Team Guy and Team Kurenai. There was Temari, her giant fan on her back, her expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. There were samurai from the land of iron who had defied Mifune's orders. And even a handful of rogue ninja Jiraiya had pulled out of the woodwork. It was an army that should not exist, a force that defied all political logic. Naruto stood before them on a rocky outcrop, the wind whipping at his jacket. He didn't give a rousing speech. He didn't make promises of victory or glory. He simply looked out at the faces before him and let his power flow. He opened the gates. The golden, sovereign aura he had kept so tightly controlled for years was unleashed, but it wasn't a command. It wasn't a bomb. It was a network. A web of light and will that spread out from him. ND touched every single person in the valley. They felt it not as a pressure, but as a connection. A shared consciousness. A sudden, profound understanding of a single, unified purpose. Temari, Asuna Kunoichi to her core, felt a flicker of Sakura's fierce loyalty to Konoha. Neji, the Hyuga prodigy, felt a flash of Kiba's feral devotion to his pack. A grizzled mist rogue felt the unwavering conviction of a leaf Anbu. Their individual loyalties, their personal histories, their village rivalries, they didn't vanish, but they were superseded by a greater, shared identity. For a brief, transcendent moment, they were no longer Suna, or Leaf, or Iron. They were Naruto's army. The Kunoichi in the crowd felt it most acutely. The natural pull they felt toward him became a conduit, a force multiplier. They became his lieutenants, his signal towers. His will flowed through them, amplified, and was broadcast to the squads under their command. Sakura, Ino, Hinata, Tenten, Temari, they became the nerve endings of this new, living army. The cult of the Silent Dawn is marching on the ceiling temple, Naruto's voice echoed, not just in their ears, but in their minds, carried along the network of shared will. They want to unleash a god of nothingness, a power that will consume the world we know. They believe we are divided. They believe we are weak. We are going to show them they are wrong. The march to the land of whirlpools was a feat of impossible logistics. They moved with the speed and silence of a single entity, their movements coordinated through the silent, instantaneous communication of Naruto's network. There were no missed signals, no broken chains of command. They were a perfect army. They arrived at the temple as the sky was turning a bruised purple, the first sign of a coming dawn. The temple was an ancient, crumbling ziggurat, perched on a cliff overlooking a raging sea. A shimmering, translucent barrier, the first seal, pulsed with a sickly light around the structure. At its base, an army of thousands of Silent Dawn cultists chanted in a low, guttural monotone, their combined chakra being funneled into a massive, obsidian obelisk that was pulsing in time with the seal, weakening it with every beat. At the head of the army, observing the ritual with a serene calm, was Lord Tensai. So, the young sovereign has come to play, Tensai said, his voice carrying on the wind, a smile touching his lips. He had expected this. He had planned for it. You have brought a band of broken toys to fight a god. I am almost disappointed. They're not toys, Tensai, Naruto's voice boomed back, amplified by the will of his army. They're the answer to your philosophy. You think power divides people. I'm going to show you that it can unite them. He gave the silent command. Engage. The battle that erupted on the cliffs of Whirlpool was unlike any that had ever been fought. It was not a chaotic clash of individuals, but a perfectly choreographed dance of war. Team Guy, empowered by their connection to the network, moved with a synergy that bordered on precognition. Might Guy opened the sixth gate, a blazing green comet, and Neji, his Byakugan seeing not just chakra points but the flow of the entire battle, guided him like a living missile, shouting course corrections that Tenten relayed with volleys of razor-sharp kunai. Tamari, from her position on a high cliff, unleashed a hurricane-force wind. But it was not a blind assault. Sakura, acting as a spotter from the front lines, used the network to send her a perfect, real-time image of the enemy's formation, allowing Tamari to carve a path through their ranks without a single friendly fire incident. The cultists fought with a fanatic's zeal, their corrosive chakra eating away at stone and flesh. But Naruto's army was a fluid, adaptive thing. When a squad was poisoned, they were instantly pulled back, and a medical unit led by Sakura was there to meet them, her hands glowing with a healing energy that seemed to be amplified by the network's positive will. Naruto himself was the heart of the storm. He didn't just command, he participated. He was a flash of orange and black, a Rasengan in one hand, a shadow clone fainting to his left. His mind connected to every single soldier on the field. He felt when a flank was weakening, when a shinobi's resolve was starting to fail. He would send a surge of his own unwavering confidence down the network to that individual, a silent, personal reinforcement that was more potent than any rallying cry. He saw Tensai, standing apart from the battle, his hands held in a complex seal. His corrupted sage chakra pouring into the obelisk, accelerating the seal's decay. He was the enemy king. Naruto knew he had to cut off the head of the snake. With a final, Alent command to his lieutenants to hold the line, he broke away from the main battle, a single, determined figure charging toward the man who sought to silence the world. The fate of the world would not be decided by their armies, but by the clash of two sovereigns, two opposing wills, at the foot of a dying seal. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Dawn After Silence. The air between Naruto and Tensai was a razor's edge. Below them, the battle raged, a symphony of steel and chakra conducted by Naruto's silent will. But up here, on the precipice of the crumbling temple, the war was one of philosophy. You feel it, don't you? Tensai's voice was calm, almost conversational, a stark contrast to the chaos. He didn't raise his fists, he held his hands open, palms up, as if in offering. The strain of it, holding them all together, forcing your will upon 1,000 minds. It must be exhausting to play God. I'm not playing God, Naruto shot back, sidestepping as a wave of black, corrosive chakra slithered from the ground where Tensai stood. I'm trusting my friends. Are they your friends? Tensai countered, his smile serene. Or are they puppets, their strings pulled by a power you can't even comprehend? You offer them connection, but it is a connection forged in the heart of your own ego. They are bound not to each other, but to you. That is not unity. It is subjugation. He began to weave hand seals. His corrupted sage chakra flaring. It didn't lash out at Naruto, but seeped into the very air, a poisonous whisper that traveled along the network of will Naruto had created. Let me show you what true connection looks like. Down on the battlefield, a Konoha Chunin fighting back-to-back with a samurai from the land of iron suddenly felt a flicker of the samurai's deep-seated resentment for the shinobi world. The samurai, in turn, felt a flash of the Chunin's ingrained arrogance toward outsiders. Tensai's poison wasn't attacking their bodies, it was attacking their bonds, too. Turning Naruto's network of unity into a conduit for doubt, fear, and old hatreds. The perfect synergy of the army began to fray at the edges. Naruto staggered, a gasp escaping his lips as he felt the discord ripple through his army. It was like 1,000 discordant notes screaming into his mind. He pushed back, pouring more of his own calm, his own will, into the network, trying to drown out the poison. It became a titanic struggle of wills, a silent war fought in the hearts of 1,000 soldiers. And all the while, the great obsidian obelisk pulsed, faster and faster. The first seal on the temple groaned, ethereal cracks spreading across its surface like splintering glass. The chanting of the cultists below reached a fever pitch. Tensai laughed, a sound devoid of joy. You see, your unity is a lie. A fragile veneer over the selfish, fearful heart of man. The only true peace, the only true equality, is the peace of absolute silence. With a final, deafening crack that echoed in the soul rather than the ears. The first seal shattered. The world went silent. The chanting stopped. The clash of steel ceased. The wind died. All sound, all motion, all light seemed to be drawn inward, toward the gaping maw of the temple entrance. From that darkness, a non-thing emerged. It had no shape, no form. It was a hole in reality, a patch of existence that had been neatly and utterly excised. It was a presence defined by its absolute absence. The silent God had been released. It did not roar. It did not radiate malice. It simply was. And its being was anathema to everything else. An aura of pure, undiluted apathy washed over the battlefield. It was not a feeling of sadness or despair, it was the feeling of nothing. The utter and complete absence of feeling. Asuna shinobi, his sword raised to strike down a cultist, simply stopped. His arm lowered. The fire in his eyes went out. Why was he fighting? What was the point? His motivations, his loyalty to his village, his love for his family, they weren't gone. But they were irrelevant. They were distant concepts with no weight, no meaning. He dropped his sword with a soft clatter and sat down, his gaze becoming vacant. Across the battlefield, the same scene repeated 1,000 times. The will to fight, to live, to be, was simply evaporating. The cultists, their purpose fulfilled, were the first to go, their bodies turning to dust not with a violent explosion, but with a quiet, indifferent sigh. Naruto's army, moments before a perfect engine of will, crumbled into a collection of empty shells. Naruto felt his network die. He felt the 1,000 lights of the people connected to him flicker and go out. He felt their courage, their hope, their very identities drain away into the great, silent void. It was the most profound, terrifying loneliness he had ever experienced. Tensai watched, a look of ecstatic triumph on his face even as his own form began to gray and crumble at the edges. Beautiful, he breathed, his voice the last sound in a dying world. The end of struggle. The end of pain. The final, perfect peace. He dissolved into a swirl of gray ash, consumed by the god he had unleashed. The wave of apathy washed over Naruto, and his knees buckled. His Rasengan sputtered and died. His will, the force that had defied fate and united an army, felt like a single, flickering candle in a hurricane of nothingness. Why fight? Why resist? It was so much easier to just stop. His vision tunneled. The world was fading to gray. The golden sun in his core, the heart of his sovereign power, began to dim, its light being swallowed by the oppressive silence. And then, he felt it. A single thread. One connection in the dead network that had not broken. It was a tiny, fragile thing, but it shone with a fierce, stubborn light. It was not a connection forged by his power, but one that had existed long before, a bond of pure, unadulterated belief. I see a light, Hinata's voice whispered in the depths of his memory. It's warm, and strong, and it makes other people want to be strong, too. On the battlefield below, Hinata Hyuga was on her knees, the apathy crushing her like an ocean. All around her, her friends and comrades were fading. But her gaze was fixed on the cliff where Naruto stood, a lone figure against the encroaching void. Her Byakugan was active, and she could see his light, that beautiful golden sun, beginning to die. The thought of a world without that light was more terrifying than any apathy. With every ounce of her being, with a strength of love and devotion that transcended bloodlines and jutsu, she held onto her connection to him. She would not let him go. She would not let his light go out. Her unwavering faith was an anchor. It pierced through the nothingness and found him. Naruto gasped, his head snapping up. That single, pure connection was a lifeline. It reminded him of who he was. Not a king, not a sovereign. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who would never give up. He looked at the silent god. And for the first time, he understood. You couldn't fight nothing with something. You couldn't punch a void. Tensai was wrong. His power wasn't meant to bind people to him. It was meant to bind them to each other. With a defiant roar that shattered the unnatural silence, he reversed the flow. He stopped broadcasting his will and started pulling. He used Hinata's anchor and reached out along the dead network, searching for the fading embers of the thousand souls he had touched. He found them, a flicker of Sakura's unyielding resolve, a spark of Shikamaru's brilliant logic, a flash of Temari's fierce pride. A glimmer of Neji's hard-won belief in a chosen destiny. He pulled on them all. He gathered every memory of laughter at Ichiraku, every shared look of understanding on the battlefield. Every ounce of sweat and blood they had shed together. He gathered their love, their rage, their hope, their fear, the entire messy, beautiful, chaotic spectrum of their existence. He became a conduit, a focal point for the combined will of his army. The dimming ember in his chest didn't just reignite, it exploded. A column of pure, blindingly brilliant golden light erupted from him, pushing back the gray. A sun rising at midnight. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki. He was the sum of all their hearts, a living embodiment of their will to be. He floated into the air, a being of pure, golden energy. And faced the void. He did not form a jutsu. He gathered all the light, all the hope, all the connection he had collected into a single, massive sphere above his head. It was a sun of will. A star forged from the bonds of mortals. He didn't throw it. He presented it. It was not an attack. It was a statement. A declaration. It was the sum of all existence, all love, all struggle, and all joy. Standing in defiance of absolute non-existence. It was the ultimate answer to the ultimate question. The Son of Will met the silent God's void. There was no explosion, no cataclysmic boom. There was only light. A pure, warm, golden light that washed over the world, not burning, but healing. It filled the whole in reality, not with matter, but with meaning. The silent God did not scream. It did not die. It simply receded. The concept of it could not exist in the presence of such overwhelming, unified will. The nothingness was driven back into the temple, and the gaping maw sealed itself shut. Not with stone or jutsu, but with a scar of solidified light, a testament to the battle that had been won there. As the golden light faded, Naruto collapsed, his body drained but his spirit serene. The sun, the real sun, began to crest the horizon, its gentle dawn rays illuminating the battlefield. And a miracle happened. 1,000 shinobi, who moments before had been empty shells, began to stir. They looked at their hands, at the faces of their comrades, as if seeing for the first time. The Suna shinobi who had dropped his sword looked at the Konoha medic helping him to his feet, and he saw not a rival, but a brother. Temari met Neji's gaze across the field, and a silent, profound understanding passed between them. The old divisions, the old hatreds, felt like a half-remembered dream. They had faced the void together, and they had returned, changed. They looked to the cliff top, to the boy in the tattered jacket who was being helped to his feet by a crying, smiling Hinata Hyuga. They saw their leader. Not a king who ruled them, but a center who connected them. In the aftermath, the world was different. The story of the Battle of the Silent Dawn spread, and it changed everything. The allied shinobi forces were formed not out of fear, but out of a shared, undeniable experience of unity. The old systems of division and rivalry, while not gone, were forever weakened. A new era had begun. Naruto Uzumaki stood at its center, the sovereign. Not a title of power, but a description of his role. He was the anchor, the conduit, the living symbol of the truth he had discovered in the face of nothingness, that the greatest power in the world was not the strength of a single individual, but the unbreakable bond between all of them. He was no longer the lonely boy begging for acknowledgement. He was home, surrounded by a family 1,000 strong, under a new dawn he had made with his own 2 hands. Chapter 10 End.